Chapter 1575. Mi Qiong and Peng He smiled and gestured for Zhao Siku to sit down. The three old men, whose ages added up to almost 200 years, sat around a stool. The two Baoyang calligraphers, who hadn't even had time to change their clothes, were still covered in the fragrance of ink. They each gulped down the wine in their cups and exhaled heavily. Their faces were somewhat gloomy. Zhao Siku was a senior eunuch who had once been in charge of the Directorate of Credentials in the Liang Imperial Palace. Although he had taken off the red python gown that was still extremely eye-catching in the palace, his ability to read people's expressions was still as shrewd and ruthless. However, Zhao Siku didn't say anything. He took a small sip of wine and picked a relatively casual topic to start the conversation. I just came back from the Green Deer Cave Academy. The Yellow Mountain Lord asked me to ask two old friends for a few calligraphy pieces. I didn't dare to carelessly agree to it, and only said that I would pass on the message. Mi Qiong shook his head. Old Peng, and I don't have the leisure to write calligraphy pieces these days. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint Brother Zhao and the Yellow Mountain Lord. How could Zhao Siku not see that Mi Qiong and Peng He, who had been inscribing tombstones all day long? At this moment, their wrists were still trembling as they raised their cups. Their mental and physical exertion was nothing more than this. So he smiled and said, "It's fine, it's fine. The Yellow Mountain Lord has already said that this matter isn't urgent. He can wait. He can wait a few years or even 10 years. Peng He smiled. As long as His Highness chases away the Baimang barbarians, let alone 3 or 4 calligraphy pieces, even 30 or 40 will be personally delivered to the Yellow Mountain Lord's Green Deer Cave Academy. But Brother Zhao, we're not outsiders, so I'll say the ugly words first. Old Me and I have heard that many foreign scholars in the Academy are not good people. They criticize our Baoyang's military and political affairs. They always think that if they come to the Prince's Mansion on Mount Qingliang or the Huayang Pass Protectorate Manor, they can turn the tide. These little bastards don't think that it's easy to just stand there and talk. Just because His Highness is easy to talk to, they can take a mile after taking an inch. Is Huang Chong not going to do anything about it? He shook his head and said, "It's not that we can't do anything about it. It's just that if we don't do anything about it, we won't be able to do anything about it. Besides, the scholars in Baoyang have changed a lot compared to when they first came to Baoyang. Occasionally, there will still be some scholars who don't know the gravity of the situation. However, their original intention is for the good of Baoyang. Many of the young people who came to Baoyang with the mentality of moving trees and people alive in mind have unknowingly considered themselves to be Baoyang people. This is a great thing. Me, who had once smashed his precious inkstone in front of Su Fengyan, grunted in agreement. The seeds of learning, the seeds of learning. These young people have truly taken root and sprouted in Baoyang. Sooner or later, our Baoyang will also have towering trees that the scholars of the Central Plains look up to. It will become a towering scholar forest." Peng He raised his cup and paused for a moment. He couldn't help but sigh. "I'm just afraid that we won't be able to see that day." Me, who was more emotional, said angrily, "Let's not talk about Yao Baifeng, who went to the Imperial College in the capital. His morals and knowledge are the best in the world. He is indeed worthy of the title of eminent scholar. Even if he leaves Baoyang, I still hope that Master Yao can make a name for himself in the imperial court. However, this Xianxia is really a good-for-nothing. He relied on his connections to become a grand secretary and forgot his roots. After it was said that he had a chance to become one of the vice presidents of the next examination, he spread the word that the number of people who are qualified to enter Baoyang for the examination in the capital is going to be cut in half from the usual 40 people in the past. Only 20 people are allowed to participate in the examination. To think that I wrote so many calligraphy pieces and birthday couplets for this old thing in the past. I wish I could chop off my own hands." Peng He sneered. "That turtle Yin is just trying to avoid arousing suspicion. Let's count with our fingers. Master Yao of the older generation, Chun Wang and Sun Yin of the younger generation are all top scholars in the imperial court. Even that assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting, who is also a vice president, is also from Bailiang. Perhaps this time, the reduction of Bailiang's examination quota is a sinister scheme that Yin Jieshi and Jin Lanting, one old and one young, came from Bailiang. Zhao Siku smiled playfully. Don't worry, my two old friends. From my point of view, this time, Bailiang's quota isn't going to be reduced. It's the exact opposite. It's very simple. More and more scholars are entering Bailiang. How can the imperial court not panic? At this time, Yin Jieshi and Jin Lanting's suggestion is just for show. Those high-ranking officials in the center of the imperial court won't accept them. On the contrary, they will increase the quota. Not only that, of these Bailiang scholars coming to the capital for the examination, if nothing unexpected happens, there will be a good number of lucky ones who are doing well in Great Peace City. The imperial court just wants to use this opportunity to tell us, the scholars of Bailiang, that if you learn both civil and martial arts, you could be of use to the imperial family. From now on, the imperial court will not give a low price. Flowers grow in the wall, fragrance grows outside the wall. Peng paused and gritted his teeth. This imperial court is too shameless. Mi Qiong was even more direct. If I were the prince, I would just stop these scholars and keep the goodies within the family. Zhao Siku shook his head and smiled. Bailiang has never done such a despicable thing since the time of the great general. In the hands of the current prince, he probably still won't do it. Perhaps in the eyes of many Liang officials, this is a stupid thing to do. However, from my point of view, justice is in the hearts of the people. That's enough. Mi Qiong nodded. Yes, justice is in the hearts of the people. Peng He finished the wine in his cup in one gulp. He gripped the empty cup tightly and said with a hoarse voice, the governor of Tiger Head City, Lu Jinu, is dead. Lieutenant Chu Hanqing is dead. Lieutenant Ma Jili is dead. All the infantry and cavalry in Tiger Head City are dead. Paluku of Yuzhou, Crouching Bao City, Wanhe City, Xiaoguang City, Qingtsang City in Liuzhou. So many places, so many Bailiang frontier army, so many people have died. Does the Liang Imperial Court know? Do the people of the Central Plains know? Peng Yi put down his cup and hammered his chest with his hand. He choked with sobs. I don't care if they know or not. Mi Qiong and I, these two old farts, have personally engraved the names of so many young Bailiang men. Every day, the white-haired people have to send the black-haired people off. I'm so bored. Zhao Siku, who had once been a pawn of a Zhao family to watch over David Gao Shilu, was silent. Young master, if you didn't die so young, if you could see this scene today, would you regret choosing Chun Jibao back then and not helping Su Fingyan as much as Mr. Li Shan did? It had not yet entered autumn, but Jizhou was already in a troubled state. At this time, Kainan, the newly appointed Jidushi of the Lianghuai Path, and Han Lin, who later became the administrator, quickly became the focus of discussion in the capital. The officials of the capital were not willing to speak well of this general who had been Gu Jiantong's trusted aide in the past. However, the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Han Lin, was a well-known civil official in Great Peace City. Thus, most of the officials of the capital held a sympathetic attitude. They all felt that it was a pity that Sir Han's life was full of misfortune. For some reason, during this period of time, no one mentioned a person surnamed Zhao who had entered the Lianghuai path earlier than Kai and Han. Even though he was the third son of the previous emperor, although he could not compare to the great Prince Zhao Wu and the current emperor, his mother was still the legitimate daughter of the Peng family, the leader of the Northern Scholar Group. However, after Zhao Xiong, who had been given the title of King of Han and had taken over Jizhou, left the capital, it was like a clay ox entering the ocean. There was no news of him. It had to be said that this third prince had once been a well-known figure in Great Peace City. He had never stopped being a romantic. When Zhao Xiong was at his peak, the four young masters of the capital, led by Wang Yuanran, were still in some corner looking on with envy. Of the 6 sons of the previous emperor, the eldest, Zhao Wu, had taken over Liaodong. He was also the only prince who held the military power of the Tiger Seal. He was given the title of General of the North and assisted General Gu Jiantang and the old king of the northern vassal, Zhao Sui, to guard the north. The second prince, Zhao Wen, had gone to Gangnam-do in the misty rain and lush forests. The fifth prince, Zhao Hong, had been given the title of King of Yu and had taken over the old Dongyue. The sixth prince, Zhao Chun, was still young and had not left the capital yet. There was a lake in a newly built king of Han's residence that Zhao Xiong named Hearing Wave Lake. Everyone knew that there was a Hearing Wave Lake in Bailiang Palace. There was a pavilion in the center of Hearing Wave Lake. It was surrounded by water, and there was no bridge. One had to use a lotus-picking boat to cross. In the pavilion, there was a rattan bed and a bamboo table. There were several plump peonies in a vase. Smoke rose from an incense burner. Zhao Xiong, dressed in plain white casual clothes, reclined on the bed with a wine cup in his hand. There was a female servant in front of the king of the northern vassal, holding an ancient book in her hand. There was also a servant girl standing behind Zhao Xiong, fanning him to get rid of the summer heat. Zhao Xiong drank a cup of wine when he read a page of the book. He did not talk to anyone and enjoyed himself. The afternoon passed slowly in the young king of Han's leisure. Zhao Xiong glanced at the sky outside the window. Soon, a servant girl helped him put on his boots. She came to the window and squinted at the motionless figure on the shore of the lake. Zhao Xiong said, "No wonder you can be the youngest general of a province in my dynasty. You really work hard." Zhao Xiong left the pavilion and took the lotus boat back to the shore. After going ashore, he walked to the Jizhou general who was in a precarious situation. When the king of the northern vassal approached, the latter cupped his fist and said in a deep voice, "This general, Yuan Tingshan, greets your royal highness, King of Han." Zhao Xiong casually waved his hand and said with a smile, "General Yuan, if you have something to say, just say it." Yuan Tingshan slowly raised his head. He stood on the shore for an entire afternoon, but his eyes were shining. There was no trace of depression on his face, and there was no flattery on his face. "I beg your royal highness to write a few bad words on the secret memorial that can reach the imperial study." Chapter 1576. Zhao Xiong pretended to be surprised and said, "How did General Yuan know that this king has the responsibility to submit secret memorials? And why did this king say bad things about you? This king has heard that you, Yuan Tingshan, are in a bad situation. Not only did you not get any benefits from your father-in-law, recently even some of the trusted aides that you managed to win over have gone to Ji Province's deputy, General Han Fong. Even Jadu Shikai has closed his door to you, not to mention Military Commissioner Han. Today, you came to this king's mansion and waited for an entire afternoon. Shouldn't you be waiting for timely help? Why are you adding fuel to the fire? Are you tired of being a general and want to be a prisoner to try something new?" Listening to the king of Han's sarcasm, Yuan Tingshan's expression did not change. He maintained a respectful posture of cupping his fist and bowing. With a sincere tone, he said, "This time, I came to visit with 10,000 taels of gold and 10 chests of calligraphy and paintings." Listening to this young man who was privately scolded as a mad dog by some officials, Zhao Xiong became absent-minded for a moment. For some reason, he thought a scene. It was a scene that he had never seen with his own eyes, but he had heard of it many times. Many years ago, there was a young general who was similar to this, begging to give gifts to people in the Ministry of War of Liang. Zhao Xiong raised his head to look at the gorgeous sky, filled with burning clouds, and said to himself, "It's a pity it's not raining." Yuan Tingshan raised his head to look at the obviously absent-minded king of Han. He lowered his head and quietly bit his lips. Of the two fathers-in-law, Great General Gu Jiantang had clearly stated that he would not lend a helping hand to the rotten situation in Ji Province. As for the Li family's Yin Bao, they had also vaguely revealed that the nearly 10,000 private cavalry of the Li family was the last of the family's assets. They would not be given to him, the son-in-law, to be squandered. Even if the 10,000 private cavalry were to fight, they would only fight in Ji Province. If permitted, they would even move to the north of Gangnam-do. They would definitely not let Yuan Tingshan bring them to the border of Ji Province to fight to the death with Beimang. As a result, the Ji Prefecture General's residence, which was originally flourishing with each passing day, was now plagued by both internal and external problems. However, Yuan Tingshan didn't care about these things. He could even take a step back in his official career and give up his position as Ji Province's general. However, Yuan Tingshan was extremely wary of one person. That was the young emperor sitting on the dragon throne in Great Peace City. Yuan Tingshan was afraid that he would become a useless general in the eyes of this ambitious emperor. Once this fatal impression was formed in the emperor's mind, it would be meaningless even if Yuan Tingshan won 100 battles. Therefore, Yuan Tingshan came to beg the king of Han Zhaoxiong, begging him to impeach him in the secret memorial. Only in this way could the young emperor feel that the entire Ji province, from top to bottom, was rejecting Yuan Tingshan like a lonely official in the imperial court. Only then would he have the chance to rise again. Gold? This king's surname is Zhao. Does he lack such things? Antique calligraphy and paintings? This king has personally touched more things in his life than you, Yuan Tingshan, have seen. Zhao Xiong patted Yuan Tingshan's shoulder. Therefore, Yuan Tingshan, in the future, when you have a meteoric rise, don't forget who it was that helped you when you were at the end of your rope. Yuan Tingshan's left hand tightly gripped the back of his right hand, his veins bulging. I swear I will never forget. Zhao Xiong bent down slightly and said softly in Yuan Tingshan's ear, in reality, no matter if you were a general in Ji province or going to Guangling province to lead troops to quell a rebellion, in someone's heart, you are not worthy of his trust. Only when your father-in-law is dead will you have the chance to rise up. These words are this king's return gift to you. Yuan Tingshan's body trembled. Zhao Xiong seemed to be slightly tired. He waved his hand and said, "You can go. This king won't send you off." Yuan Tingshan continued to bend his back and took a few steps back before turning and leaving. Zhao Xiong looked at that back and said with a smile, "You're looking down on my third brother too much." "Yes, you're also looking down on me, Zhao Xiong." "Fine, I'll help you this time." Jiang and Yangzhou had a scenic spot called the Scattered Flower Terrace. The mountain was not high, but there were no mountains within 100 miles, making it stand out. It was said that in the Dafeng dynasty, there was an enlightened monk who preached here, causing fairies to scatter flowers and rocks to nod their heads. In the twilight, the famous people of Gangnam-do gathered their friends and gathered at the Scattered Flower Terrace to admire the moonlight. Everyone brought their own cushions, wine, tea, chopsticks, incense burners, rice, and other things. They lined up on the peak of the mountain. Tonight, there were 900 people on the mountain. Under the guidance of a famous person, they stood up and loudly recited, "My generation's writings are as high as the white snow." Close to 1,000 people sang the famous poem, "A Journey to Jiangnan." For a moment, the sound was like thunder and the wine flowed like a spring. Late at night, the pure, white moonlight shone on the Scattered Flower Terrace. Chapter 1577. Among them was Lu Daolin, who had resigned from his post as the Minister of Rights a few years ago. He was the old master of the Lu family at Lake Pavilion. At the same time, he was the older brother of the former Minister of War, Lu Baijie. In a short 10 years, the Lu family had produced 2 ministers. It was indeed worthy of the former emperor's praise. Of the Lu family's children are a dazzling array of dazzling jewels. Although Lu Daolin had retired to the mountains and forests and Lu Baijie had quietly left the capital, it did not diminish the Lu family's transcendent status in Jiangnan that suppressed the other 3 families. There was also the old head of the Su family, Su Yinsheng. After his eldest son, Su Gong, was conferred the title of Longxiang General, this old man peacefully lived out his remaining years. Although a few years ago, Su Shufei suffered an unexpected mishap and was banished to the Changchun Palace, causing the entire Su family to suffer a great loss. Fortunately, Su Gong did not disappoint. He entered the capital to serve as the assistant minister of the Ministry of War and supported the family. Su Yinsheng, who had previously closed his door and refused to receive guests, finally appeared. Sitting beside the old man was his youngest daughter, Su Huipeng. Dressed as a yellow-crowned Taoist nun, she and Tangxi sword immortal Lu Baijie had a grudge that was not fated to be together. Everyone in the Jiangnan Taoist force knew about it. The middle-aged Confucian scholar, Yuan Jianyan, was not only the mainstay of the Yuan family, but also a famous talker. Beside the old man with a white cat on his lap sat a spirited young man. He lowered his head and bent his waist, gently waving the folding fan in his hand. However, he was not fanning his family's ancestor, but the lazy white cat. Behind the young man stood a green-robed swordsman who did not touch a drop of wine. When everyone was drunk, he was the only sober one. The four Gangnamdo families, the Lu family, the Yu family, the Yuan family, and the Gomu Su family were the main forces in the south that contended against the scholars in the north. Once, the Green Party in Qingzhou was a natural ally of the four families. Unfortunately, they were not successful and were easily destroyed by the former Minister of War, Zhang Jilu. Although the four surnames fought over every detail in the Jiangnan circuit, and generation after generation continuously fought both openly and covertly, in Great Peace City, in the imperial court of Liang, the four surnames were incomparably united. Su Gong was able to enter the capital from a local place and forcefully take down the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, the elderly head of the Yu family who raised a white cat, and Yu Jiankong, who had not hesitated to personally make a trip to the capital, were all extremely important. Su Yinsheng looked at Yu Jiankong, who was a generation older than him, and sighed softly. Elder Yu, chaos is everywhere now. Take Yuanghua, for example. He finally made a comeback and became the Minister of Revenue in charge of money. But in just a few days, he was sent to Guangling Circuit next door to us to be a provincial governor. Because it is under the jurisdiction of a vassal king, he is only a deputy. If it weren't for the Grand Chancellor and Tannan speaking up for Tang Shi and suppressing it, it probably wouldn't have been Kainan, but Tang Shi who would have been the provincial governor of Lianhuai. Elder Yu, although Tang Shi is still the Minister of War, His Majesty has clearly moved his mind to change the position. In Elder Yu's opinion, where should Tang Shi go from here? We also have a target and can plan for the long term. Yu Jiankong smiled and pointed at Lu Daolin. The minister's brother is not in a hurry, so why are you, Su Yinsheng, in a hurry? Lu Daolin said helplessly. It's not that I'm not in a hurry, it's that there's no use in being in a hurry. Fortunately, Kainan has already gone to Lianhuai Circuit and Yuanghua has gone to Guangling Circuit. As long as Tang Shi isn't sent to Nanjiang, she probably won't be doing too badly. Yu Jiankong stroked the white cat's head and said calmly, in the past, there was a battle between civil and military officials from the capital to the ground. Now, both sides have become a thing of the past. Next will be the battle between North and South. Grand Chancellor Qi of Zhongshu Province is a classic Southerner. Deputy Zhao Yuling is a Southerner. Tantanan is a Northerner. Chun Wang is a Bailiang. They have fought to a draw. Let's count the 6 ministries of the Minister of State. The new Minister of Appointments, Yin Mao Chun, is a Southerner. The 2 successive Ministers of Revenue, Wang Xiongui and Yuanghua, are all Southerners. If we add in Lu Daolin, the former Minister of Rights, and Liu Baijia, the current Minister of War, don't you feel that there are too many of us Southern scholars at the front of the court? In this way, if Su Gong is allowed to take control of the Ministry of War and the former Assistant Minister of Justice, Han Lin, takes over as Minister of Justice, how will the Northern scholars survive in the future? Moreover, the number of scholars in recent years has been dominated by Southerners. Thus, Han Lin went to Jizhou and Yuanghua went to Guangling Circuit. These are all reasonable matters. There is no need to make a fuss. In the future, even if Tang Taizhuang becomes the Minister of War, Su Gong can only continue to be an assistant minister for another 4 or 5 years. There is nothing strange about it. Yu Jiankong paused and smiled. What is interesting is that there is a new power in Taiyan City that cannot be underestimated. Grand Scholar Yin Jieshi, Left Chancellor Yao Baifeng of the Imperial College, Chun Wang of the Minxiao Province, Assistant Minister of Rights Jean Lanting, Minister of Yellow Gate Yin Qiji, and the temporarily dormant Sun Yin are all from Bailiang without exception. However, they all have good reputations in the officialdom. There are not many of them, but each of their words carry a lot of weight, especially that Chun Wang. He is an extraordinary person. Even compared to Bai Yan's career back then, he is not inferior in any way. This is somewhat similar to the Green Party that interfered between Zhang Lu and Gu Lu. However, Compared to the Green Party, this group of officials that can barely be called the Cold Party have never formed a party. Have you all noticed that although these people all come from Bailiang, their loyalty to His Majesty is something that none of the other civil and military officials in the imperial court can compare to? In the future, I am guessing that Chen Wang, whose future is limitless, will lead them and form a tripartite balance of power with us northern and southern scholars. Yuan Zhongyan sighed ruefully. Could it be another Bai Yin? Yu Jiankong shook his head and said, I'm afraid it's more than that. Lu Daolin raised his head and gazed at the moonlit night, lost in thought. For some reason, Su Huipu's expression was rather sorrowful. Perhaps she was thinking of Sword Immortal Tang, she who was far away in the capital, or perhaps she was thinking of a certain woman surnamed Su who liked to wear red and was already separated by Yin and Yang. Yu Jiankong smiled slightly and said, What our four families need to do now is take a step back. If Liaodong's Peng clan and the other northern families want to seize the seats in the capital at this time, we will pretend to be reluctant and give them all to them. As for when we will take a step forward, it's very simple. Wait until the Peng clan and the others are full of people. At the same time, we must wait until Chen Wang, Sun Yin, Fan Zhongho, and the others have truly matured before we act. Right now, let those northern barbarians and those young people have their own conflicts. They might be able to make things difficult for those juniors in the next few years, but sooner or later, they will suffer greatly. In this period of time, you people should take a step back. It's not like you really don't care about anything. You might as well add flowers to the brocade for those young people of Great Peace City who have a bright future. Help them make a name for themselves in the literary world, boost their reputation, and occasionally sing poems. Treat it as sowing good karma. Yuan Zhongyan laughed and said, What's so hard about that? Then Yu Jiankong did a strange action. He raised his wine cup, turned to face the northwest, and toasted from distance. I, Yu Jiankong, represent the Central Plains in toasting your Bailiang. Toasting you and your father. Chapter 1578. Since the end of the Yonghui era, the Yamen of the 3 provinces and 6 ministries of Liang, big and small, had changed drastically. Senior officials such as Zhang Jiulu, Minister of War Gu Jiantang, and this old man of the Song family had either died or left the center of the capital. A group of people led by the head of the Secretariat, Qi Yanglong, had ascended to high positions in the imperial court. Among them, there were seniors like Chen Wang, the left scattered cavalry of Minxiao province, as well as young scholars like Li Jifu, Wu Congxian, and Gao Tingshu, who had become famous in the Xiangfu Yunyan imperial examination, whose qualifications were far inferior to Qin Xiaobao's. Tang Taizhuang and Su Gong had also become assistant ministers. Among the old officials of the cabinet, there were also a lot of changes. A large number of Yonghui officials, including Zhao Yuling and Yin Maochun, had almost all changed their official positions. Yuan Guo, Han Lin, and Wang Xiongui had all been transferred to other places and became nominal border officials. Among them, only Huan Wen was an anomaly. As an old official of 3 dynasties, no matter how the officials of the same dynasty changed, Tananon had always been in charge of Minxiao province. Although it was rumored that he was not feeling well and had to make room for the second-in-command of the Secretariat, Zhao Yuling or Yin Maochun, the heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel, to the civil and military officials of Great Peace City. As long as His Majesty did not give an explicit order, Tananon was still the dominant figure who had great influence on the entire imperial court. Even if Huan Wen really retired, as the only remaining senior official and literary leader of the Liang dynasty, the political affairs of Liang would inevitably be handled by this old man who was praised as the national treasure by the late emperor. No wonder the Huan family in Great Peace City would tease them out of kindness. As autumn approached this year, the emperor asked the imperial household department to carefully craft more than 40 ink slabs with auspicious talisman engraved on them and gave them to the important officials. Those who received them all thought that they were treasures. Only Huan Wen received 3 slabs. Even Qi Yanglong, Yan Jieshi, and Chen Wang only received 2 slabs. Moreover, not only did Huan Wen receive this honor, but he also received an old ginseng that could be said to be the best among all the tributes in Liaodong and a jar of Chunling wine. As a result, the private discussions that speculated that Tananon might not be able to survive the second year of the auspicious talisman vanished in an instant. Following the rise of the two provinces under the Hall of Secretaries and the relocation of the Hamlin Academy to a new location, as well as the establishment of the 6 pavilions, a large number of important civil officials were sent out. The Zhao family, which was originally a gathering of Yamen offices, lived up to the grand occasion of all the officials of the imperial court gathered here in the early years. On the first day of autumn, the emperor specially opened the Golden Autumn Garden, which occupied the largest area and had the best scenery among the 4 imperial gardens, and held a grand banquet for all the officials. Before the banquet began, the young emperor, who was quite interested, even set a new rule for Liang to welcome autumn. He had the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Song Tonglu, bring in a pot of Chinese parasol tree that had been planted long ago. When the time came, he had Chun Wang temporarily act as the grand historian and loudly shout, "Autumn is coming." Then, the emperor personally plucked a piece of Chinese parasol tree leaf, implying that the emperor represented the common people in reporting to the heavens for autumn. In this impromptu and elegant matter that had no precedent, Chun Wang, who became the first reporting to the emperor to welcome autumn of Liang, was undoubtedly the most eye-catching. Empress Yin Dongwu stood together with her younger brother Yin Shiji. After seeing this scene, this moving woman, who was the mother of the nation, said softly to her younger brother, "You must strive to become the person to report to the emperor for autumn next year." Yin Shiji, who was most afraid of being in the limelight, said with a headache, "Sister, what is there to fight about this kind of thing? Besides, I can't fight for it." With Chun Xiaobao in front, next year, probably only the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting, or the new chancellor of our Hamlin Academy can take on this role. Otherwise, Song Kelly, Fan Zhongho, and the others would be more justified than me. Yin Dongwu glanced at the civil and military officials with different expressions. The older ones, like Qi Yonglong and Huan Wan, were, after all, old and had reached the top of the court. There was no need for them to add flowers to the brocade. Therefore, they all had an indifferent attitude towards this matter and did not want to fight with the younger generation. However, the younger generation of officials, such as Zhao Yuling and Yin Maochun, were slightly different. They also did not need to fight for anything and were not suitable. However, when they looked at Chun Wang, who was a generation lower in seniority, there was still a hint of envy in their eyes. As for Gao Tingshu, Wu Tsongxian, and the other young people who had just made a name for themselves in the court of Liang, all of them had burning gazes. These years, Jean Lanting, who had been successful in Great Peace City, was unperturbed. It seemed that he already saw the person to report to the emperor for autumn next year as something in the bag. Yin Dongwu, who now had the bearing of a phoenix, did not look sideways. She did not whisper to her beloved younger brother, and said with an indifferent expression, "Your brother-in-law needs you to fight for it. However, he will not say anything to you directly. However, if you have the heart to improve, he will be very happy." Yin Shiji sighed helplessly and said, "All right, then I'll do my best." Yin Dongwu looked out of the corner of his eye at his father, Yin Jieshi, who was chatting happily with Wen Shoren, the Grand Secretary of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy, and the other court officials. He changed to an unquestionable tone and said, "Our father has already helped you pave the way. The 6 Grand Secretaries of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy, plus the 6 newly established Grand Secretaries of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy. These 12 people will be the most noble court officials of our dynasty in the future. You are still young and do not have enough experience. You do not have the extravagant hope that our Yin family will have 2 Grand Secretaries, but it will not be difficult for you to become a Grand Secretary of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy in 10 to 20 years. Moreover, Grand Secretaries of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy are an empty title and will not be taken away just because an official leaves the court. In addition, in a few years, if nothing unexpected happens, Father will be promoted from the Hall of Martial Meritocracy to the hall of martial meritocracy. Yin Qiji said timidly, "Sister, in the end, we are relatives. Shouldn't we avoid arousing suspicion?" Yin Dongwu turned his head expressionlessly, but there was clearly some anger in his eyes. He directly interrupted his brother's words and said in a low voice, "Can you really not see the undercurrent in the court? Even you, the brother-in-law, are not helping your brother-in-law. Do you want to place your hopes on those civil officials who are becoming better and better at being officials?" Yin Qiji wanted to speak, but stopped. In the end, he lowered his head and admitted his mistake. The emperor walked over to the side of the brother and sister. Seeing Yin Qiji's embarrassed state, he smiled and joked, "What is it, brother-in-law? Were you scolded by your sister again? Every time Grand Secretary Yin sees me and occasionally mentions you, his son, it is always difficult to hide his proud smile. Your sister, on the other hand, scolds him every time she sees him. I can't help but feel indignant for you. No matter. Since your sister is not close to you, I am very close to you, the brother-in-law. In the future, if you are wronged by your sister, feel free to come and complain to me. We can drink together to relieve our boredom." Yin Dongwu smiled gently and asked, "What troubles does your majesty have to relieve?" The young emperor, who had been caught red-handed, was immediately speechless. This made Yin Qiji, who was watching the fire from the other side, feel even more amused. The Emperor Zhao Zhuan reached out and pointed at his brother-in-law, who was rejoicing in his misfortune. "Ungrateful. I accidentally got into trouble because I wanted to help you." If a normal subject heard the words ungrateful from the mouth of an emperor, they would probably be scared out of their wits. It was unknown if Yin Qiji was too slow or what, but he was not nervous at all and smiled apologetically. Although the young emperor snorted coldly on the surface, in the depths of his heart, he was not angry at his brother-in-law's arrogance. Instead, he felt very comfortable. If they were not family, they would not be so casual, although the emperors of the previous dynasties called themselves emperors. Which emperor really liked the feeling of being alone? Yin Dongwu suddenly said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, the matter of the palace serving girls cannot be delayed any longer." Zhao Zhuan quickly laughed and then found an excuse to go find the head of the secretariat to discuss military matters. Chapter 1579. After the banquet, the emperor allowed the officials to tour the Golden Autumn Garden on their own. Thus, the civil and military officials spread out in groups of 2s and 3s. They seemed to be careless, but there were many things to pay attention to. For example, Qi Yanglong and Huan Wen, the two big shots of the court, walked side by side. Zhao Yuling of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, who had resigned from the Ministry of Personnel, pulled 5 or 6 officials with him. The current heavenly official, Yin Mao Chun, chatted happily with the group of Hamlin Academy scholars. A few newly appointed scholars with shaky foundations naturally walked hand in hand. After the death of the blue-eyed girl, the 6 officials of the Xianxia province, who had been leaderless, also had their own positions and did not stick together. Zhao Shixuan, on the other hand, stuck together. The assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Tang Taizhuang, walked with 2 great generals of the same generation as his benefactor, Gu Jiantang. One of them was the great General Zhao Cheng, who had not paid attention to worldly affairs for many years, and the other was Yang Shenxing, whose face had been covered in dirt for the past 2 years. On the other hand, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Liu Baijia, walked with the young officials from Jiangnan. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Wen Tai, and the former general of Qingzhou, Hong Lingshu, who had recently been summoned to the capital, had just made it clear that they would not interact with each other for the rest of their lives. Today, they met again. It looked like they had buried the hatchet and were on good terms with each other. It was hard not to wonder if the Green faction was going to make a comeback. As for the 2 Yao families in the north, led by the Peng and Liu families, the people in charge of the Great Peace City also stayed together. Qi Yanglong and Huan Wen, these 2 old men, did not walk slowly. Their steps were large, so they walked further and further away from the group of officials behind them. The 2 old men came directly to a famous spot in the Golden Autumn Garden. It was the Spring God Mountain, built from nearly 100 pieces of Spring God Lake stone. Although the spring god lake stone had long been loved and revered by some famous scholars of Jiangnan, it was only in the past 5 years that it had truly become popular and known to all levels of society. Piece by piece, the stone was continuously picked up from the bottom of the lake. Last year, it even flew into the royal family and became a mountain overnight in the Golden Autumn Garden, becoming famous under heaven. The spring god lake stone was known to be thin and wrinkled. It was a high-quality spring god lake stone, was exquisite and had a natural aura. So it was said to be one gene of 1 or 2 tails of gold. Huanwen did not climb the mountain. Instead, he stood a few dozen steps away from the spring god lake mountain and gazed at the short mountain that was said to be shrouded in mist. The sound of rain could be heard on rainy days, and the sound of conches could be heard in strong winds. Seeing that Tananon had no intention of climbing the mountain, the head of the secretariat, Qianglong, smiled and accompanied Tananon where he stood. The atmosphere in Liang Imperial Court was very relaxed, compared to the confrontation between Zhang and Gu. When Zhang Jiulu and Gu Jiantang, these 2 serious civil and military leaders, were present, the civil and military officials could be said to be trembling with fear of making mistakes. Now that it was the good-tempered Qianglong and Huanwen, everyone was much more relaxed. In addition, they had coincidentally met Zhao Zhuan, a young emperor who had just ascended the throne and could not be considered to have accumulated great power. Therefore, the senior officials of Great Peace City liked to tease the younger generation that they were on good terms with. Compared to them, the old officials of Yonghui, they had met at a good time. Tantanon, who had drunk a lot at the banquet, burped. He turned to Qianglong and asked with a smile, "Head of the Secretariat, do you know the origin of my nickname, Huanwen Tananon?" Qianglong smiled and shook his head. Huanwen laughed and said, "In the beginning, I wasn't called Tananon. There was a guy who gave me the nickname of Wine Gourd. If I angered him, he would scold me as a wine bag and a good-for-nothing. The name Tananon was something that happened much later. There was one time when I was on duty with that guy in the forbidden area. I couldn't control my mouth and secretly drank some wine. It just so happened that I was caught red-handed by the previous emperor who had been reading books all night. I drank too much and spoke without restraint. I told the previous emperor that as long as I, Huanwen, had wine in my stomach, I would be magnanimous. However, if there was a day when His Majesty did not give me wine to drink, I would be full of complaints. The previous emperor was amused and immediately had the head eunuch, Han Xianxia, bring over several jars of wine. At that time, there was a guy who had never touched wine who drank a cup for the first time. His face was as red as a monkey's, but after I was drunk, I laughed at him and told him not to call himself Green Eyes, just Red Face. He replied, "Shut your mouth and be a good Tantanon." It was probably from that time onwards that I became the Tantanwang. Perhaps many officials felt that this nickname meant that I, Huanwen, was a tumbler in Liang's officialdom. No matter how turbulent the court was, I would always sway along with it. But in the end, I never fell. Qianglong sighed and said, "Whether as a person or an official, Tantanon has never done anything that his heart could not get over. I'm not as good as Tantanon." Huanwen rolled his eyes and said, "Head of the Secretariat, your words are too much of a bootlicker. If it were someone else who said it, I would even think that they were scolding him." Qianglong smiled, but did not say anything. He was in charge of the Secretariat of the Liang dynasty, which had been neglected for many years. A few decades ago, the Zhao clan of the old Liang dynasty, which was located in the northern lands and was divided by the vassal towns, had bestowed the titles of head of the Secretariat, left and right servant archers, and Shizhong to the vassal towns' military generals who were too powerful to get rid of, and the valiant military officials who controlled the court to show their favor. They were all empty titles, just like the Great Pillar State and the Great Pillar State later. However, today was different from the past. The Secretariat of the Secretariat, which had lost a lot of power, became a veritable important place of the court again. Qianglong also took the opportunity to become the next Grand Secretary after Zhang Jiulu. Some of the power that had been taken away by the Hamlin Academy long ago also returned to the Secretariat of the Secretariat. However, Qianlong was well aware that as the head of the Secretariat, who was summoned to the capital to put out the fire, in the end, he was just a transitional prime minister. After helping Yin Maochun, Zhao Yuling, and the others to ascend to the throne, he had to retreat unscathed. However, Huanwen was different. Whether it was the former emperor or the current emperor, they all regarded this Tantanon, who had a good personal relationship with Zhang Jiulu, as a trustworthy teacher of the emperor. Qianlong was very clear about the hubbub of Huan Wen's resignation this time. It was not that the young emperor was afraid of Huan Wen, but that Huan Wen himself had the intention to retire. That was why there was such a beautiful story that Huan Wen alone received 3 imperial inkstones. Huan Wen said softly, "Young people should be busy. When they are busy, they can shake off the floating air. Old people should be idle. Only when they are idle can they enjoy the rest of their lives." Qianlong shook his head and said in a low voice, "At this time, everyone in the court can be idle except for Tannan. The Guangling Road, the Bailiang Road, and the Liangliao Road are all not peaceful. The court needs Tannanon to help make decisions. Many times and many things, even if Tannanon does not speak, as long as you sit there, even if you're dozing off, the hearts of the people in the court will not be in chaos. An old man in a family is like a treasure. This is exactly what Tannanon means." Huanwen continued to look at the small mountain for a while, then slowly turned his head and smiled. "In terms of age and seniority, the head of the Secretariat and my teacher are of the same generation." Qianlong quickly waved his hand and said, "Don't give me that. Your teacher and I were famous for not getting along well in the past. As for the conflict between Confucianism and legalism, the two of us could never come to an agreement. After I came to the capital, I was already very lucky that Tannanon did not make things difficult for the Imperial College and the Secretariat." Huan would no longer use the head of the Secretariat's respectful and unfamiliar title. He said sincerely, "Although Mr. Qi does not have the same political views as my teacher admired your scholarly skills very much." In Huan Wen's opinion, the reason why people say that it is better to hide in plain clothes than to hide in official clothes is actually a hypocritical way of saying that either one has done enough as an official or one can't be an official. It is far inferior to Mr. Qi, who can hide in plain clothes and help the world. Qianlong smiled. "Tantanon, oh Tantanon, it is one thing for us 2 old men to flatter each other here, but the problem is that no one is listening to us. How can we pass on and leave our names in history?" Speaking of this, Qianlong said with a hint of sarcasm, "When I was young and studied history, when I first read about someone or something, I always felt that my blood was boiling or moved. Later, when I thought about it, I realized that it was an extreme case of fishing for fame. Their intentions are punishable." Huanwen laughed heartily. "Mr. Qi, you are right. I also had the same feeling when I was young." Qianlong sighed for no reason. The writer of the past, the flipper of the future. Huanwen also sighed and suddenly asked, "Mr. Qi, have you never met that Su Fingyan?" Qianlong nodded. "That king of Bailiang has been to Shangyin Academy, but unfortunately, I have never met him." Huanwen laughed and said, "My teacher and the old King Liang have scolded each other many times. As a student, although I have only met the young king twice, the feeling is really not enough for outsiders to know." Qianlong said in a bad mood, "What's there to show off?" Huanwen smiled happily and hard, not hiding his mischievous meaning. Huanwen asked again, "Mr. Qi, do you know the 2 things I like to do the most since I became an official in the capital?" Qianlong replied, "I'd like to hear the details." Tannanon narrowed his eyes. First, he raised his left arm and waved his sleeve. Then he stretched out his right hand and gently tapped in the air with his index and middle fingers together. "Every day in the court, I watch civil and military officials come and go, dazzling and dazzling. I listen to the jade pendants on their waists tapping, tinkling, tinkling, crisp and pleasant to the ear. I'll never get tired of watching and listening." Qianlong laughed and said, "I didn't feel it before, but I have to pay attention to it in the future." Huanwen raised his head, not looking at the mountain, but at the higher sky. "Heaven and earth are like a big jade plate. Large and small beads fall into it, crackling and shattering. They all die. Qianlong closed his eyes and tilted his head slightly, as if listening attentively. He murmured, "Yes, the most brilliant bead in the world in the northwest is finally about to shatter. You and me, and those yellow and purple high lords behind us, are the culprits." Huanwen laughed and said, "We are the scholars who are ashamed of the classics." Qianlong still closed his eyes and laughed softly. It turns out that the real scholars don't read books. Chapter 1580. The sudden fall of Huda's city allowed the Northern Mang army to unfold an extremely comfortable offensive posture at the southern end of the Dragon Eye Plain, leading to the emergency of Huayang Pass and Liuya and Fuling towns. At this critical moment, the deputy commander of the Northern Liang Infantry Army, Great Ancestor Gu, stood his ground against the opinion of the masses and did not disperse his troops to reinforce the front line. Instead, he gathered in the area of Zhongzhong military town behind Huayang Pass and urgently converged with the large border cavalry army led by the deputy commander of the cavalry army Zhou Kong. In this way, Huayang Pass and Liuya and Fuling towns, as the base of the Northern Liang Protectorate Manor, imperceptibly replaced Huda City as the second Huda City. However, because Chu Lushan, the nominal number 1 commander of the Northern Liang Border Army, insisted on personally guarding Huayang Pass, Great Ancestor Gu's action of not lending a helping hand pushed this foreign old general from the old southern Tang to the heart of the storm. Not only the cavalry generals, even the interior of the border army infantry system had a lot of complaints about Great Ancestor Gu, especially after Chen Yinxue, who was also the deputy commander of the infantry army, temporarily led troops from Yuzhou to reinforce Liangzhou province. The 2 Northern Liang infantry generals who had the same rank also had a lot of disagreements. In addition, Jean Partridge, Zhou Kong himself was a typical aggressive commander in the Northern Liang army. For a moment, Great Ancestor Gu was deserted in Zhongzhong military town, and Great Ancestor Gu, as the base of the Northern Liang Protectorate Manor, imperceptibly became the second Huda city. However, because Chu Lushan, the nominal number 1 commander of the Northern Liang Border Army, insisted on personally guarding Huayang Pass, Great Ancestor Gu's action of not lending a helping hand pushed this foreign old general from the old southern Tang to the heart of the storm. Within Grave Tomb Military Town's temporary general manor discussion hall, another dispute that almost completely tore apart all pretenses erupted. Those officers and captains whose official positions weren't that high were already a bit numb. Right now, Grave Tomb and Huayang Pass defensive line behind Tiger Head City had already completely lost contact. Before this, there were already no less than 100 elite crossbowmen who died in battle while delivering military intelligence. In reality, Huayang Pass and Liuya Fuling towns could already be considered isolated outside the pass, submerged under Northern Mang Great Army's armored cavalry. In the meeting hall, there were originally more than 10 chairs. Great Ancestor Gu, Zhou Kong, Chun Yunxue, who came from afar, Qi Danghua, the commander of the 6,000 iron-footed cavalry, Yuan Nanting, the commander of the White Scale Guards, and the others all had their own seats. However, the day before yesterday, Zhou Kong stood up angrily in front of Great Ancestor Gu, kicked a chair, and left the meeting hall. Today, Zhou Kong and Great Ancestor Gu had an irreconcilable dispute about the location of Zhongzhong town. This cavalry general, who had the reputation of Brocade Partridge, stood on one side of the table with a sand table. He punched the table with his left hand and pointed at Great Ancestor Gu with his right hand. He said angrily, "Defend? Do you only know how to hide and defend? Is this all you can do, Great Ancestor Gu? I really don't know why His Highness invited you from the Central Plains to our Bailiang frontier army. If it wasn't for the fact that you wrote Collection of Ashes, and if it wasn't for the fact that the great general and Sir Li praised you endlessly back then, this general would have suspected that you were a spy for the Northern Mang barbarians." Hearing this, not to mention the young generals like Ningamei, the deputy general of the Iron Fudu Cavalry, who could only be regarded as a rising star compared to the old generals, even the silent Chen Yunxue's eyelids trembled. Zhou Kang's words were obviously too much. Chen Yunxue glanced at Great Ancestor Gu from the corner of his eyes. Great Ancestor Gu was still indifferent. However, Zhou Kong didn't show any sign of mercy. He pointed his finger at Great Ancestor Gu even more fiercely. Huayang Pass can't be defended if you can't even defend Huda Town? Liuya and Fuling Town rely on the flexibility of the cavalry to actively seek opportunities. Can they defend it? Great Ancestor Gu, you are the commander of the infantry, but I am the deputy commander of the Bailiang cavalry. I can't bear to see the tens of thousands of cavalry in Liuya and Fuling Town have to dismount and fight on foot because of your opinion. In the end, they can only die on the city wall. I can't bear to see the tens of thousands of cavalry under my command crowding around the heavy tomb every day, watching their comrades die in the front line every day, but they can't fight. In the end, Zhou Kang's eyes were almost burning with anger. He reprimanded, Great Ancestor Gu, it's fine if you are afraid of death. I don't care if your infantry likes to be cowards. But why do you want our cavalry to wait for death here? Great Ancestor Gu said indifferently, because without the support of Commander Zhou's cavalry, the heavy tomb can't be defended. The city is dead. Without the restraint of the cavalry, there is no city in the world that can't be broken. Similarly, without the cooperation of a stable city, the cavalry is like water without a source. It's not hard to win a few battles, but it's unrealistic to win the entire battle. Zhou Kong sneered. Then your infantry should just obediently wait in the heavy tomb. It's enough as long as you cooperate with our cavalry and watch us kill the enemy. This request isn't too much, is it? Right now, Dongzhuo's army has yet to truly gain a foothold, but our cavalry can roam through our own defensive line with our eyes closed. Not to mention charging and attacking. Even if it's a night battle, we can fight cleanly and efficiently. The disadvantage in numbers can be made up for by our familiarity with the geography. Great Ancestor Gu, you keep saying that you want to wait for news from the two battlefields of Qingtsang City and Xiaoguang City in Yuzhou, and that it's best to delay until the new city on the border of Liangzhou is built. But for better or for worse, you are someone who has led troops in battle. How can you not know the principle of fleeting opportunities on the battlefield? What? You can't be thinking that after Protector General Chu dies at Huayang Pass, you can go to that new city and become the next Protector General, right? Great Ancestor Gu's expression did not change. He only stared at this Bailiang's third-in-command, who spoke without thinking. He slowly said, Zhou Kong, there is no joking in the army. There are some words that I can tolerate, but there are some words that can't be treated as a fart. Zhou Kong narrowed his eyes and laughed sinisterly. You finally can't tolerate it anymore? There are 30,000 Bailiang's right army outside the city. Do you still dare to kill me in the heavy tomb? Then, Zhou Kong laughed and pretended to look around. In the romance novels, there's an interesting joke about throwing a cup as a signal. It's said that as long as a wine cup is thrown, several hundred executioners will rush out and chop the person into mincemeat. It's just that you, Great Ancestor Gu, don't have a wine cup in your hands. These generals and lieutenants in the room don't seem to listen to your orders, do they? Great Ancestor Gu smiled. You and I both know that in the military town of Heavy Tomb, you, Commander Zhou, put me under house arrest. Now, all the generals here more or less don't like me. The veteran General Xianxia, who was afraid of adding fuel to the fireside. How did things come to this point? It would be good if Chu Lushan was here. Otherwise, Yin Wenluan or Yuan Zuozong would be fine too. This was the result of a group of dragons without a leader. If they were not facing a major event that could affect the trend of Bailiang and even the entire world, Great Ancestor Gu, Zhou Kong, and even the young Bailiang military talents like Ningame of Qidong could take charge alone and decide the outcome of a state war. They would not have such a headache. Thinking of this, Chen Yunxue suddenly felt sad. He remembered the military years when he was young. At that time, there were so many fierce generals and strategists gathered together. Li Yishan, Zhao Chongling, Yin Wenluan, Wu Yong, Su Pu, Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, Zhong Hongwu, Chen Zhibao, Yuan Zuozong, Chu Lushan. But at that time, there would be someone who would make the final decision. There would never be such an unfamiliar situation that was close to internal strife. Unfortunately, The prince had to go to Liuzhou in person to put out the fire. And Chu Lushan, the #1 person of the border army who guarded Huayang Pass, for some reason, did not make any decisions about the complicated military affairs of Heavy Tomb behind him. Chen Yinxue knew that if he did not act as a peacemaker, there might be a big fight in the conference hall today. While Chen Yinxue was more inclined towards Zhou Kong taking the initiative to attack, Great Ancestor Gu was the leading figure of the infantry in Liangzhou. Chen Yinxue could not help but feel some sympathy towards Jean Partridge's unbridled humiliation and suppression. In the end, this was not a conflict between Zhou and Gu, but a natural conflict between Beiliang cavalry and infantry. Even Yin Wenluan could not change this conflict. Beiliang had more infantry, but in the war with Beimang, the main characters were always the cavalry. In the end, it was also the cavalry that decided victory. Just like when Beiliang was changing between the old and the new, the Longxiang army and the Great Snow Dragon cavalry had each attacked Beimang and shone brilliantly. Later on, in Yuzhou, which was known as the main camp of Beiliang infantry, it was the 10,000-strong cavalry led by the young General Yu Luandao that shook the world. Chen Yinxue took a few steps closer to the table and pressed his hands lightly on the table. He said softly, "The situation in Liangzhou is not good. Liuzhou is the same. Even Wang Yi has to go there personally to face Lu Gui's army. Maybe he will also face that Tuoba Bodhisattva. Let's not make trouble for Wang Yi. If you have something to say, say it. If you are angry, don't say it." Chapter 1581. Chen Yinxue paused for a moment and glanced at Zhou Kong and Great Ancestor Gu, who were standing opposite each other. "Everyone, allow me to remind you that this is the Border Military Conference Hall, which is second only to the Northern Liang Protectorate. This is not the Liang Temple, where civil officials talk and military officials run errands. We are also not those civil officials who stay out of the affairs and glorify themselves as strategists. You and I are both leading troops to war. Perhaps someone will personally go to the battlefield tomorrow. Perhaps today will be the last time I, Chen Yinxue, will see you. I believe in General Gu's cautiousness, and I also believe in General Zhou's decisiveness. Whether the Heavy Tomb cavalry will fight or defend, from the looks of it, there are pros and cons. General Gu and General Zhou have already discussed a lot. Right now, we can't get in touch with Huayang Pass. Commander Yuan is not in Liangzhou, and Prince has also gone to Liuzhou where the situation is urgent. Can we attack and defend at the same time? For example, if General Gu thinks that General Zhou's 30,000 left cavalry, General Qi's 6,000 iron stupas, and General Yuan's white feather guards are too radical, then Great Ancestor Gu hesitated for a second and said firmly, "Commander Chun, to be honest, we not only have to defend the Heavy Tomb cavalry, but also have to leave enough cavalry for Beiliang. This is not a question of radical or conservative, but we can't fight this battle in the first place. At the very least, even if the Heavy Tomb cavalry can kill more than 100,000 enemies, even if we lose more than 30,000 of our own, the left cavalry can't form an absolute fighting force within a year. In that case, Beiliang has already lost. What's more, facing Dongzhu's well-prepared cavalry and Dongzhu's well-prepared left cavalry and General Qi's and General Yuan's two elite cavalry armies, can we really guarantee a complete victory without any losses?" Great Ancestor Gu picked up the special bamboo pole and drew a big circle south of the Heavy Tomb cavalry and north of the border of Liangzhou. Why is Zhonghu's 40,000 right cavalry still not moving? He didn't hear the bad news about Hoda City, so he went north to the Heavy Tomb cavalry? The reason is very simple. Whether or not the new city, which cost half of Northern Liang's resources, can be successfully built will determine whether or not Northern Liang can once again fight outside the pass. Under this premise, Huayang Pass can be lost, and even the grave that we are in can be lost. However, before we break through the city, we must do our best to stop Northern Mang's army to the north of the new city. The longer, the better. It doesn't matter how many enemies our Beiliang frontier army kills during this period of time. It doesn't matter if Commander Chu, Great Ancestor Gu, Chun, Qinyun, or Zhou Kong. Great Ancestor Gu smiled bitterly and said, Dongjua can't wait for us to take the initiative to fight him and exchange forces with him. As the king of the South Courtyard, he is very happy. To put it bluntly, the Beimang barbarians in Xijing and Norland only care about how many Beiliang frontier army Dongjua has killed, but they don't care too much about how many Beimang soldiers have died. Look at the Hulu Pass on the Eastern Front. That young general called Zhong Tan has killed many Beimang siege troops. No matter how many people have died, as long as he breached Wugong City and Wana City, he will be promoted by Old Lady Murong and become the new Beimang Xia Zhimo. I don't mind asserting that as long as the left cavalry is mobilized, even if more than 10,000 people are killed in battle, the throne of the king of the South Courtyard under Dongjua's but will be stabilized for another half a year. Great Ancestor Gu lowered his head and looked at the sand table as he said in a hoarse voice, I know, except for me. Everyone else in the room thinks that Heavy Tomb has let down the Beiliang frontier army, Hutu City, and Lu Jinu since they chose to avoid the battle despite having so many soldiers. At this moment, a slightly indifferent voice sounded from the gate of the conference hall. Enough. Not only Great Ancestor Gu raised his head abruptly, but all the generals, including Zhou Kong and Xianxia, also turned their heads to look at that slender figure. The young man looked travel-worn, but he made people feel very reassured. This person was Su Fengyan, who came to Heavy Tomb military town from Courtyard Pasture alone. In order to arrive at Huayang Pass as soon as possible and bring more soldiers to Liuzhou province for Shi Fu, the general of Liangzhou province who had regained his power, Su Fengyan didn't even take a white horse attendant with him. Su Fengyan, one of the 4 grandmasters, had an ugly look on his face. However, what really made Su Fengyan angry was the storm in the conference hall. Qi Jiajie's sword Qi, which had been suppressed, had been stirred up again. Hutu City in Liangzhou province had fallen, Lu Jinu had died in battle, and Liuzhou province was very likely to be completely annihilated by the Longxiang army. It was hard to say whether Yang Yuanzhan's army in Yuzhou province could be completely surrounded by Yang Yuanzhan's army. The new city on the border of Liangzhou province had not been built yet, and there were no huge cities to rely on and no reliable passes in Liangzhou province. However, Su Fengyan, who was one of the mainstays of Liangzhou province's cavalry, was suddenly critically ill, and Su Fengyan couldn't join the battle for the time being. It could be imagined how bad Su Fengyan's mood was at this moment. However, the young lord who strode into the conference hall still tried his best to restrain himself. Even so, Su Fengyan didn't show any intention of denouncing anyone. Even Zhou Kong, the fearless deputy general of cavalry, lost his arrogance and felt a little guilty for the first time. Su Fengyan gently exhaled. After a moment of silence, he slowly opened his mouth. I also want to go to Qingtsang City in Liuzhou province and beat Toba Bodhisattva to death. It would be best if I could kill Lu Gue as well. However, I can't do that now. Moreover, Liangzhou province is more important than Liuzhou province. Therefore, I could only come here without stopping. Then I stood outside the door and listened to your quarrel for about 15 minutes. It's a pity that I didn't get to see Commander Gu and Commander Zhou fight. It's a pity. Embarrassed, Zhou Kong coughed a few times. When some of the young captains saw this scene, they tried their best to hold back their laughter, but it was difficult for them to do so. Su Fengyan did not continue to dig at the old generals. He walked to the north of the table and faced the south. The generals of the left and right factions naturally held their breaths and stood solemnly. Su Fengyan said, subduing the enemy without fighting is the specialty of the civil officials. We Beiliang don't like this. If the Beimang barbarians want to go south, then we will fight and win. We will beat them until they can't even return to Beimang. Fighting and winning has always been the self-confidence of our Beiliang, or perhaps the Su family's iron cavalry. It's not arrogance. However, even Su Xiao has never felt that a smooth victory is worth being happy about. Which battle was the battle that established our Beiliang frontier army as the #1 army in the spring and autumn war? It was Su Xiao who told me personally that it was the Battle of the Western Rampart that was the most bitter, the most tragic, and the most casualties. There were many times when he couldn't even see hope and almost wanted to give up. Now, our Bailiang will face the second battle of the Western Rampart. Su Xiao is no longer here. Li Yishan, Zhao Chongling, Chen Jibao, Wu Qi, Su Pu, Zhong Hongwu, and others have either left or died. But now, by my side, there are you, Chan Yunche Zhou Kong, Yuan Nanting, Qi Dangwa, Ningame, and great ancestor Gu who just entered Bailiang. To the north, there are Chu Lushan at Huayang Pass. To the east, there are Yin Wenwan's infantry and Yu Wandao's cavalry in Yuzhou. There are also Hu Kuei and Huang Fujin. In the mouth of the gourd, there are 2 heavy cavalry troops led by Yuan Zuozong. To the west, there is Su Longxiang, Li Mofan, and Wang Lingbao's Longxiang army, and Yang Guangdou, and Qin Shiliang's Liuzhou provincial governor's office. To the south, there are even more, not to mention Bailiang's local civil and military officials. There are even thousands of foreign scholars. The retired Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, and the others, including the old soldier Lin Dofeng, have all made it clear that they want to come back and return to the Bailiang frontier army. Su Fengyin suddenly smiled and said, "Whether there will be such a story about Bailiang fighting against a country in the history books in the future is the civil and military officials of Liang. It's none of our business. They can write whatever they want. But at least I think that after a few years, everyone here should strive to survive and tell their descendants and juniors about their military life. It's always good. Probably just like what Su Xiao nagged me about all those years ago. If by any chance someone here were to die in battle, he wouldn't have the fortune to show off to the young people." At this point, Su Fengyin looked at Zhou Kong. "For example, if you, Zhou Kong, were to die in battle, I believe that in the future, there would be an old man surnamed Gu. If he met a young man surnamed Zhou, he might sit down and casually chat for a bit. While drinking wine, he would say that old man Zhou Kong from your family back then. His words were always unpleasant, but he was a hero who was willing to die for Bailiang." Su Fengyin's expression became absent-minded for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "If I were to die in battle and any of you survived, then please tell your descendants that Bailiang lost in a battle to the death, not without a fight." Chapter 1582. Unlike Luya and Fuling, Zhongzhong military town, which was located behind Huayang Pass, was mostly guarded by infantry. However, compared to Huayang Pass, which had a natural barrier to rely on, Zhongzhong military town seemed to be less confident. In fact, on this line of defense, the general of Zhongzhong military town could not stand up straight when facing 3 colleagues of the same rank, and his voice was never loud. The 2 towns of Luya and Fuling had always been garrisoned with a considerable number of cavalry troops at the border. The 2 generals of the 2 towns were related to the 2 current deputy generals of the cavalry. Zhongzhong was an awkward character that was neither loved nor loved by his grandmother. Although it belonged to the northern Liang cavalry, it had more infantrymen. However, it had nothing to do with great ancestor Gu and could not rely on anyone. When Huayang Pass became the location of the protectorate manor, Zhong, who was raised by his stepmother, became more and more inconspicuous. Su Fengyin lived in a courtyard that had just been cleaned up. The courtyard was not big, but it was elegant and quiet. It was not easy to find a courtyard like this in a military town that was filled with influential officials at the border of Liangzhou. After Su Fengyin lived in the courtyard, he sent a signal to Zhongzhong that was worth chewing. The young lord did not summon Zhou Kong, the partridge who had accompanied His Royal Highness to the capital with hundreds of old soldiers, nor did he summon great ancestor Gu, who he had found in the Jianghu of the Central Plains, nor did he summon great ancestor Qi Dangwa, who was the adopted son of a general like Chu Lushan and Yuan Zuozong. Instead, he called Ningame, who was from the Phoenix Battalion, to drink with him in the courtyard. The new deputy general of Iron Pagoda, Ningame, was still the interesting man with a rough appearance and a delicate voice. However, he was more restrained than before. After all, the young man sitting across from him was no longer His Royal Highness, who was looked down upon by the whole Bailiang. Su Fengyin clinked his cup with Ning Amaze and lamented, "Back then, General Ning took 100 men to accompany me to cause trouble in Jianghu. Many of them, including Hong Shuwen, are no longer in the Phoenix barracks. They have all become local military officers or even field officers. Yuan Meng, however, is still here. A few days ago at the Courtyard Ranch, he complained to me that he mentioned to you that he wanted to enter the Iron Stupa. However, not only did you not agree because of old friendship, you also scolded him. Ningame subconsciously sat up straight and said with the graceful voice of a woman from Dongyue, "The Phoenix Battalion has had many new faces in the past 2 years. I feel that with an old man like Captain Yuan in the battalion, I can be at ease." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "Some of the young men who left the Phoenix Battalion under the identity of the White Horse Righteous faction would occasionally meet in private. I heard that they like to ask each other how high an official they have become, as well as how high an official they hope to become. They talk about who will become a border general or a border official in the future, and whether or not they can support each other. In this aspect, it is a bit like the Liang Imperial Court's fellow countrymen in the imperial examinations. Back in the day, our Bailiang's earliest border crossbowmen also went through such a phase. When they first met again, they were all talking about who had died on the battlefield. Moreover, they were all speaking in a very envious tone. After a few years or 10 years, it was different. They were all asking how big the newly bought residence was, how beautiful the newly taken concubine was, and how many acres of high-quality farmland they had obtained. Seeing Ning Amei's expression change drastically, Su Fengyan waved his hand and smiled. "Don't be nervous. This is all human nature. Situations like the Phoenix battalions are rare for the time being. When the water is too clear, there will be no fish. I understand this principle. Besides, Su Xiao also said something similar. In his eyes, the world we live in now is too different from decades ago. At that time, almost everyone was thinking about how to survive. Everyone's head was tied to their waistbands. The only difference was that the commoners' heads were tied to straw ropes, while the scholars' heads were tied to the more valuable jade waistbands. In reality, everyone was in precarious situations. But now, everyone is thinking about how to live better. Therefore, since last year, families have all moved outside the borders of Bailiang. Since staying in Bailiang could lead to death, then they fled to a place where there was no smoke, a place where they couldn't hear the hooves of Beimang's horses. If Huainan doesn't work, then they can go to Gangnam-do. If Gangnam-do is also at war one day, then they can go south of the Guangling River. If that doesn't work, then they can go to Nanjiang. As long as they have money, they can escape all the way south. In the end, they can survive." Su Fengyan's fingers twirled the white porcelain wine cup that didn't lose out to the exquisite ones used by the aristocratic families of Jiangnan. He raised it slightly. "I am one of the few extravagant people in the world. I know the market price of this small wine cup. In the rich places of the Central Plains, it probably sells for 2 or 3 taels of silver. After painstakingly moving to our Bailiang, the price will more than double. Of course, if we really want to talk about it, the valuable items in Mount Qingliang are innumerable. The scholars of the Central Plains say that Bailiang made millions poor, but one family rich. In fact, they aren't wrong. Just in Wutangan alone, there are more than 300 precious calligraphy and paintings with the word fake on my handprint. However, compared to people like Zhonghan Wu, I, Su Fengyan, have long been known for being a prodigal son. I'm not quite the same as those misers." Chapter 1583. Su Fengyan smiled and said, "When I was young, Su Xiao would always bring priceless antiques to Wutangan. He didn't understand what was so good about them, and he didn't understand how they could be sold for such a high price just by writing a few words or smearing some ink on them. He could only tell me that they were worth a lot of money, and then he would add how many Bailiang horses and how many Bailiang swords could be bought with them. In these years, I had Administrator Li Gongda, Lingzhou Provincial Governor Su Beiji, and Song Dongming helped me secretly sell antiques, and paintings. I watched box after box of things being moved out of Mount Qingliang. General Ning, do you know what I was thinking?" Ning Amei shook his head with all his might. Su Fengyan joked, "I just wanted to complain to Su Xiao that you made a loss back then." Ning Amei laughed involuntarily. Su Fengyan restrained his smile. Let's not talk about the distant past. Bai Yu had only been at Mount Qingliang for a few days, but he was already dissatisfied with Song Dongming. How could I let Zhou Kong and great ancestor Gu get along? One was one of the few Bailiang old soldiers who was willing to look up to me. The other was an outsider I invited with great difficulty. One was in the cavalry, the other was in the infantry. Today, it was wrong for me to speak up for either in the discussion hall. Family matters, national matters, and the world matters. Let's talk about family matters. Wang Linquan, who had vaguely become Bailiang's god of fortune, and Liu Dongjiang, who was depressed and unable to achieve his goals, were two fathers-in-law and two in-laws. Logically speaking, I should help the Liu family, who is not acclimatized. But can the Liu family really be supported? Among these, I just didn't want to delve too deeply into Wang Linquan's schemes against the Liu family's descendants. One was too shrewd, the other too stupid. They hit it off immediately. Ningame sighed, speechless. He didn't dare to say anything, nor did he know what he could say. Su Fengyan looked at Ningame and joked, "Do you think it's not easy for me to become the head of the household?" Ningame, whose thoughts had been seen through, nodded. Perhaps he was worried that he would be seen as a bootlicker, so he said in a deep voice, "This general really thinks so." Su Fengyan said, "I'm just complaining, that's all. I could drink a little wine with you. It's actually very easy. The truly difficult ones are Lu Jinu and the others who carve their names on the stone steels on Mount Qingliang." Su Fengyan put down his wine cup. "But the ones who have it even harder are you, Ningame, Zhou Kong, and Grand Ancestor Gu. It's all of you." Su Fengyan exhaled heavily and stood up. "Maybe there are places like Bailiang in the whole of Liang. In this great world where everyone can live, some people are willing to die. But I'm sure there's no other place where so many people are willing to die together." Su Fengyan turned to look at Ningame. "I don't feel the slightest bit of heartache for the things in those chests to be sold to other high-ranking officials and dignitaries. Even if Mount Qingliang is emptied, and my Su family is left with nothing, it doesn't matter." Su Fengyan's mouth twitched. It was unclear whether it was because of the sword chi in his body or because of some other reason, but he seemed to be gnashing his teeth. He said fiercely, "But the real assets that Su Shao left to me, such as the 300,000 steel cavalry, after I succeeded to the position of king of Bailiang, I would feel heartache if even one of them died. Another example is the morale of my Su family's army. I would feel guilty if even a fraction of it was lost in my hands." Ningame suddenly thought of saying, "Those who think too much will tire their hearts. Those who think too much will suffer." Su Fengyan suddenly laughed and said softly, "Do you know what the old generals, Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, and Lu Yuanji, were thinking when I passed by the right cavalry commander, He Zhonghu's mansion, and saw them visiting the sick? Among them, Lu Yuanji told me a few words from the bottom of his heart. The old man said that in a short 20 years, the young Lieutenant Zhong Hanwu, who would always lead the troops in a battle to the death, would become the Huaihua, great general who held great power but only knew how to eliminate dissidents in the army. Lu Yuanji told me that we must cherish the Bailiang cavalry now. In another 20 or 30 years, we might not be able to see them again. Therefore, he and Wei Taizhan wanted to take advantage of the fact that they were still able to ride horses and raise their swords to die a quick death before they could see the Bailiang cavalry again." Ningame took a sip of wine and murmured softly, "Born in Bailiang and dying in Bailiang. How delightful." After muttering to himself, Ningame, who paid great attention to details, carefully put down the wine cup in his hand. As if he felt that he had placed it in a wrong position, he even moved it a little. Only then did he stand up and ask, "Your Highness, I've always had a question in my heart, but I didn't dare to ask. Since I've drunk wine today, perhaps the wine has given me courage to ask." Su Fengyan froze for a moment, then smiled and said, "Ask away." Ningame grinned and asked, "I just want to know, if there comes a day when all 300,000 Bailiang cavalry are gone, will you regret it, Your Highness?" Su Fengyan said without hesitation, "Nonsense. I'll definitely regret it to death, to the extent that my intestines turn green." Ningame scratched his head. There didn't seem to be any disappointment on his face. Instead, he chuckled and said, "As expected, Your Highness is good at doing business, but when it comes to buying people's hearts, you're still a lousy layman." Su Fengyan laughed loudly. Ningame said seriously, "But I know that even if you know that you'll lose all 300,000 cavalry and have to start all over again, Your Highness will still make the same choice." Su Fengyan grunted in agreement. "I can also see that. In the past few years, my ability to buy people's hearts has been SOSO, while General Ning's flattery has improved." Ningame smiled calmly and said, "If old General Liu is right, dying on the spot is perfect." Chapter 1584. After Ningame left the courtyard, Su Fengyan, who reeked of alcohol, was cleaning up the mess on the stone table. The two deputy commanders, Zhou Kong and Chen Yunxue, came together with a heavy expression. Su Fengyan already had a premonition, so he signaled the two generals to sit down. As expected, Chen Yunxue told him a piece of bad news. Tian Heng, the commander of the Yuzhou cavalry, split his troops into two groups. He had his deputy commander, Yu Wandao, lead 20,000 cavalry to take a detour and rush out of Calabash Mouth. The old general personally led 10,000 cavalry to block the Iron Hove from the Beimang and Liaodong lines. After fighting and retreating 3 times, there were only 4,000 cavalry left. All of them died at the Jita slope at the border between Yuzhou and Hezhou. Yin Wenwan had no choice but to transfer 16,000 elite infantry from Yuzhou to reinforce the Helan Mountain defense line in the northeast of Yuzhou. During this period, as the Huai provincial governor Kai Nin did not send troops and was determined to watch from the sidelines, the entire Hezhou existed in name only. Wang Sui's cavalry rushed straight to the east gate of Yuzhou. Chen Yunxue sighed. Although I knew that the imperial court was unreliable, Kai Nan, who had more than 100,000 soldiers, used to be Gu Jiantang's right-hand man. In the end, he did not even have the courage to fight a symbolic battle. I don't know if it was Kai Nan's own idea or if the new administrator, Han Lin, secretly received the order of Graydon City. Partridge Zhou Kong snorted coldly and said, "There's no difference. Kai Nan is a dog that Gu Jiantang raised outside. Gu Jiantang himself is not any better. He is also a dog that the Zhao family threw into Liao province. This time, he avoided battle and gave the large river province to Wang Sui with both hands. Kai Nan and Han Lin probably have a tacit understanding. The court hopes that people in northern Liang die. Gu Jiantang wants to preserve his strength so that he can bargain with the Zhao family in the future. Right now, the only true troops under the Gu family's command are the Duo Yin elite cavalry that Tang Tai Huang raised. If Kai Nan's vitality is greatly damaged, he can forget about returning to Graydon City in a grand manner. If Kai Nan is injured, he will not be able to return to Graydon City." Su Fengyan shook his head and said, "In fact, Kai Nan and Han Lin both want to fight this battle. However, Han Lin wants to fight immediately while Kai Nan is waiting for Gu Jiantang's secret letter." Chen Yunxue and Zhou Kong looked at each other. Zhou Kong was impatient and could not hide his thoughts. He lowered his voice and asked curiously, "Your Highness, is this the spy report you obtained from the Shui room?" Su Fengyan smiled and said, "Previously, at the escaped summer town at the foot of Wudong Mountain, I had some dealings with Yin Mao-chun and Han Lin's son and made a shady business deal. This time, Han Lin took the initiative to reveal the true intentions of the central government in the capital. It could be considered a show of sincerity to Bailiang." Zhou Kong said in surprise, "That's strange. Did the Zhao family's son and Gu Jiantang's brains get caught in the door? Why did they suddenly change their minds and become benevolent bodhisattvas?" Su Fengyan hit the nail on the head and said, "Gu Jiantang wants to fight because the situation forces him to. Putting aside the grudge between him and Wang Sui, Dong Yue's son-in-law, Wang Sui's swaggering departure from the Eastern Front is an open slap to Gu Jiantang's old face. No matter how good Gu Jiantang can tolerate it, he still has to consider the opinions of the people in the imperial court. The reason why he wants Kai Nan to fight a little later is that he wants to cooperate with the two Liao border armies to fight a big battle. Before that, he naturally wants Wang Sui to fight to the death with our Yuzhou garrison for a while so that he and Kai Nan can reap the benefits. To Gu Jiantang, this is a great opportunity. Once he succeeds, the situation at the border between the two Liao dynasties will instantly change from a long-lasting stalemate of equal strength to the advantage of the two Liao dynasties. As for the imperial court, Han Lin didn't say much. I can only figure out some of the meaning behind his words. It seems like someone has proposed a very aggressive strategy during the small imperial court meeting. They want to use Ji, Bei, and Hezhou as bait to lure the enemy deep into the enemy's territory. In order to complete the deployment, not only Kai Nan, but also Yuan Tingshan's remaining private army of Li Jiayin Castle and the newly risen deputy general of Ji province, Han Feng, will become involuntary pawns. Zhou Kong clicked his tongue and said, "This is a rare big move in Graydon City. Your Highness, those old fellows who do nothing, like Zhao Yao and Yang Xinxing, I don't think they have this kind of courage, do they?" Su Fengyin hesitated for a moment, his face dark and gloomy. Minxiao Province's left scattered cavalry officer Chen Wang, Sun Yin who just got fired from the Imperial College, and Lu Su, the hermit who just got a new master from King of Jing'an, Zhao Sun. This must be the plan of one of these three people. However, after this plan was proposed, without Qi Yanglong and Huan Wen's approval, without Zhao Yuling and Yin Maochuan's agreement, it is destined that it will not be able to leave the capital and pass it to Han Lin. Zhou Kong said with a strange expression, "Why does it sound like our Bailiang owes them a great favor?" Su Fengyin joked, "You can't say that. Graydon City is a stubborn and willful brat. One day, he suddenly knows how to consider the big picture. While in the end, it is to protect his own interests, it will still surprise the officials beside him." After laughing, Chun Yinxue said worriedly, "Will Wang Sui's army affect the battle at the Calabash Gate?" Su Fengyin nodded and said, "Of course it will, but Wang Sui still can't change the big picture." Perhaps Wang Sui never had this thought in the first place. Yang Yuanzhan, Lu Gui, and Huang Songpu, who has returned, are all obstacles to Wang Sui taking control of Beimang's military power. It is already reasonable for the old woman and the Taiping commandery to have the foresight to come to Yozhou's aid. Just wait and see. As long as the eastern front of Beimang is dragged into a quagmire by Gu Jiantang and Yang Yuanzhan's army is destroyed, Wang Sui will be able to stand out immediately. He will go from being the commander of a single front to a person of power no less than Dong Zhuo. When that day comes, Wang Sui will truly show his abilities. Chen Yinxue sighed emotionally. Huda City was lost at the wrong time, but there is nothing we can do about it. Lu Jinu has already done enough. Now that the war has reached this stage, we can only see who can endure longer. In the established strategy of the senior Bailiang advisors and military leaders, such as Li Yishan and Yan Wenwan, although they had long foreseen that Beimang would attack Bailiang from the south with all its strength, they did not know which place to break through. Apart from Lingzhou, Liuzhou and Yuzhou were obviously more logical than Liangzhou, which was at its peak. However, Dong Zhuo had made two unexpected moves. First, he pressed the border on three fronts, minimizing the advantage of a single Bailiang cavalry in one of the battlefields. Secondly, the Bailiang frontier army had the tactical intention of moving around through their own well-developed post-house routes. Then, he personally oversaw the army on the central front, sparing no effort to attack Huda City without any regard for losses. Moreover, at the crucial moment when a main force of the cavalry outside Liangzhou Pass was quietly rushing to the mouth of the Calabash, he coincidentally captured Huda City, which was originally expected to be defended to the death for another 2 to 3 months. Su Fengyin calmly said, "In this war between Bailiang and Beimang, there were actually two turning points. The first was when the Fuling cavalry general Wei Liang rashly attacked. Both sides set up their own ambushes. Looking back now, it was indeed Dong Zhuo who had a bigger appetite at that time. Unfortunately, because that Fuling junior commander Wei Liang interfered at the Crouching Dragon Pass, both sides' plans fell through, inadvertently allowing Bailiang to escape disaster. The second turning point was when Dong Zhuo tried to use Liuzhou as a breakthrough point again, allowing the tens of thousands of Dong families' personal soldiers to secretly leave the Central Front. In the end, he was stopped by Chu Lushan's 8,000 cavalry. I originally thought that the mouth of the calabash would be the third turning point for Bailiang to seize the initiative. Chapter 1585. Su Fengnian laughed self-deprecatingly. It seems meaningless to talk about this now. Chen Yunshui said seriously, almost 200,000 Beimang barbarians' heads, especially Yang Yuanzhan's head. Your Highness, how can this be meaningless? Su Fengnian was silent for a moment, then said slowly, earlier in the meeting hall, I only said some empty words to boost morale. Since you, Zhou Kong, have taken the initiative to come to me, then I'll be frank. Zhou Kong said resentfully, if you want to beat or scold me, do as you please. I'm already very satisfied that I'm able to walk into this courtyard today without being refused the door. Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, in terms of cavalry, you, Zhou Kong, have gathered 30,000 left cavalry, Qidong's Iron Stupa, Yuan Nanting's White Feather Guard, and He Zhonghu's scattered 40,000 right cavalry. In total, there are more than 80,000. It can be said that the majority of Bailiang's cavalry is here. As for infantry, apart from the troops that have entered Huayang Pass and Liuya and Fuling towns, Great Ancestor Gu still has 30,000. Old General Qin also brought some Yuzhou infantry with him. It's not wrong that you, Zhou Kong, don't want to hide in the grave area, but Great Ancestor Gu is worried that the 30,000 left cavalry will be used in the exchange of troops. Great Ancestor Gu's words hit the nail on the head. Now, anyone and any soldier outside Liangzhou Pass can die. As long as the new city can be built smoothly before the autumn of the third year of Xiangfu, then it can be considered a worthy death. Then from now on, with Huayang Pass and Grave as the center of attack and defense, all the troops and attacks must be carried out around this principle. Su Fengnian poured a full cup of wine, dipped his finger in the cup, and quickly pointed on the stone table. The first complete line of defense outside Liangzhou Pass is with Huda Town as the core. The cavalry of Liuya and Fuling towns on the two flanks will act as a distraction. Huayang Pass, which is located in a dangerous area, and Gravesite and Qingyuan towns, which are more inclined to defense, will act as the second small line of defense under this framework. Even if Huta Town falls, we won't lose everything. Now that we don't have Huta Town, this thorn in our flesh, Beimang's army has spread out on all fronts. Now, excluding Gravesite, not only Huayang Pass but also Liuya, Fuling Town, and Qingyuan Town are facing Beimang's infantry siege. In my opinion, Fuling and Luyang Pass can be lost, but Qingyuan Town cannot fall. If we lose Qingyuan Town, which controls the west gate of Liangzhou Pass, not only will Li Zhong's 40,000 cavalry be forced to withdraw, it will also allow Dong Zhuo to attack Liuzhou however he wants. Therefore, Zhou Kong, you need to reinforce Qingyuan Town and intercept Dong Zhuo's cavalry. Not only do you need to stop them from moving south too smoothly, you also need to try to take down this 40,000 cavalry in one go. For this reason, I will ask Yuan Nanning to transfer half of the White Feather Guards to cooperate with you, so that we can form an advantage in the battlefield around Qingyuan Town. Zhou Kong frowned and said, if that's the case, then Gravesite's Gu. Zhou Kong suddenly noticed Su Fengnian's strange look and quickly changed his words. Won't Commander Gu be under too much pressure? With only 6,000 iron stupas and half of the White Feather Guards, Gravesite will completely lose the initiative in the battle. Su Fengnian glanced at the partridge and said in a low voice, therefore, Great Ancestor Gu is paying the price of Gravesite's infantry being beaten like a tortoise, so that you, Zhou Kong, can gallop on the battlefield in Qingyuan. Zhou Kong didn't say anything. Su Fengnian reminded him, Bailiang cares a lot about the gains and losses in Qingyuan, and Dong Zhuo can probably see that whether Qingyuan will become a trap for Beimang to besiege the city and attack the reinforcements will be up to your left cavalry to judge on the battlefield. At that time, I hope that you can resist the military merits of thousands or even tens of thousands of people. Once you fall into the blockade of Beimang's main cavalry, You should know that no one has the ability to make soldiers out of beans, so there's no way to make 30,000 cavalry soldiers for you to send into the Qingyuan battlefield. What's more, after the left cavalry and half of the White Feather Guards are surrounded by Beimeng, let alone Qing, grave site, great ancestor Gu, and old General Chun can only retreat to He Zhonghu's army in one breath, and there's only a newly built city behind us. Zhou Kong suddenly asked in a low voice, in the Battle of Qingyuan, both sides' intentions are still not hidden. I believe that with Dong Zhuo's insight, Beimeng's barbarians are very likely to besiege the city and attack the reinforcements. At most, they didn't expect that not only would my 30,000 left cavalry be mobilized, but even the White Feather Guards would cooperate with them. In that case, Your Highness, why don't we just directly target Beimeng's ambush? I have confidence in our crossbowmen. In our own territory, we can definitely accurately find out the Beimeng's backup plan. Moreover, even if we meet on a narrow path and have to fight in pairs, Dongzhuo's crow pin won't be enough. Your Highness, don't worry. I, Zhou Kong, guarantee that I won't act according to my whims. We'll listen to great ancestor Gu. All the battles of the left cavalry are to preserve our strength. Su Fengyan shook his head without hesitation and said, fighting this battle in Qingyuan is only to do our best to prevent Beimeng from being too passive. It's not that I don't want to take risks. It's not that I don't want to gamble with Dong Zhuo on the sand table. It's just that I can't. Beimeng can afford to gamble, and they can afford to lose. At the very least, they can afford to lose again. But we can't squander even a single opportunity. At this point, Su Fengyan asked with a smile, General Zhou, the toad wants its life and the snake wants its fill. Do you feel very sullen? Zhou Kong chuckled and said, I do feel a little cowardly, but I'm an old soldier who has followed the great general for many years. I know what's important and what's not. But to be honest, after arriving in Bailiang, everything has been smooth sailing for so many years. This time, if Your Highness hadn't come to the grave, great ancestor Gu might not have been able to stop me. Chun Yunxue, who had been quiet all this time, said thoughtfully, we do need to reflect on ourselves. Your Highness, you've seen and heard with your own eyes what happened in the meeting hall today. Other than Commander Gu, I'm afraid that even I can't stand this. Yes, for the past 20 years, our Bailiang Frontier Army has been competing with the Beimeng barbarians. Not to mention a battle with a few hundred people, we've never lost a battle with more than 10,000 people. So this time, we've suddenly lost Huda's city, which greatly reduced the battle results we were about to obtain at Heluku. We seem to be a little stunned. If we can't turn this around, we might suffer a big loss this time. Your Highness, it's not that I, Chun Yunxue, want to flatter you, but you've come at the right time. When Su Fengyan sent Zhou Kong and Chun Yunxue to the door of the small courtyard, he said to Zhou Kong, without reason, if Dong Zhuo has set up 2 or more large-scale ambushes in Qingyuan, your left cavalry should consider retreating to the west. If that doesn't work, you could take a detour and return to the grave. Zhou Kong was stunned. The west? Your Highness, if we go further west, we'll be at the border with Liuzhou. Su Fengyan didn't say anything. Zhou Kang's eyes suddenly lit up. He asked carefully, Your Highness, are you saying that we can win the battle at Liuzhou? Su Fengyan laughed softly. Ko Jianghuai and Shi Fu are both generals who can turn the tide. As for whether they can do it, whether they can make the Qingyuan cavalry battle the third turning point of the Liangmang War, let's wait and see. Chapter 1586. In the past, Ningame was able to jump from a lower-class 6th-rank general in the Phoenix Battalion to a lower-class 3rd-rank Iron Buddha Deputy General with real power. This was clearly because he was close to Su Fengyan. This time, he was able to be the first to meet the young king. Although it was unexpected, it was within reason. After all, Ningame represented all the young generals that Su Fengyan had promoted in the Bailiang army in recent years. Su Fengyan was especially fond of Ningame. In the eyes of others, it was naturally intentional. Chun Yunxue and Zhou Kong, the 2 highest-ranking deputy generals of the border army in the military town of Sirius Tomb, followed closely behind and appeared to follow the rules. Following this, Su Fengyan met with Qi Danghua, Yuan Nanting, and the others. In the end, he summoned the generals who were stationed in the military town of Serious Tomb all year round. Su Fengyin was always lukewarm in these closely linked meetings. The generals of Serious Tomb were not familiar with the temperament of the young king. During this period, there were people who wanted to use bold words to express their loyalty and determination to Su Fengyin. In the end, Su Fengyin just laughed it off and casually changed the topic. This made these people, who had left the traditional officialdom of Bailiang for many years, still feel uneasy when they stood up and left their chairs. They were afraid that their flattery had hit the wrong horse. Fortunately, Su Fengyin personally sent them to the entrance of the courtyard, which made them feel much more at ease. They cannot be blamed for thinking too much. Ever since Su Fengyin came to power, there had been a saying in the upper echelons of the border army that the new King Liang was ruthless and generous. And the target of his ruthlessness was precisely them, the generals of the border army. For example, the Huaihua general Zhong Hongwu, who treated Ling Zhou as his own back garden, did not even have the chance to die of old age. As for the general Yin Wenluan, who was entrenched in Yuzhou, it was said that a lot of his sharpness had been suppressed. Su Fengyin took over the Tiger Pounce camp and supported Yu Luandao. It was obvious that he wanted him to replace Tian Heng as the general of the Yuzhou cavalry. And before this, he transferred away the provincial governor Tian Peifong, who was obedient to Yin Wenluan, and replaced him with Hu Kuei, who was not heavily factionalized and whose faction was unclear. In addition, Su Fengyin's trusted aide, Huangfu Xiong, was placed in Yozhou's military. And the relationship between great ancestor Gu and Zhou Kong and Chen Yinshui, who were deeply rooted in the border army, was so strained. Was there really no incitement from the young king? Otherwise, how could an outsider who had just entered the border army for a few years speak so boldly in the meeting hall of the grave? It was said that now that Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, Lin Dofang, and the other elders had returned to the border army, it would undoubtedly weaken the military power of Zhou Kong, Chen Yinshui, and the others to a certain extent. But no matter what, with and without Su Fengyin in charge of the grave, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. Regardless of whether or not this shrewd King Liang would take the opportunity to purge the left and right cavalry armies of Liangzhou, as long as he sat in that small courtyard, even if he did not give any specific orders, then the following big battle could be fought. Among the many guests in the small courtyard, only great ancestor Gu was missing. In the end, Su Fengyin did not wait for the deputy commander of the infantry army to take the initiative to visit. After weighing the pros and cons, he gave up the idea of summoning great ancestor Gu. Su Fengyin felt somewhat regretful. Regardless of victory or defeat, in the future, the relationship between great ancestor Gu and Zhou Kong and the other local generals was destined to be difficult to return to how it was before. This kind of parting was not the same as the struggle for benefits between the factions of officials in the imperial court. On the contrary, it was more similar to the apparent unity caused by conflicting political views. The more it was like this, the harder it was to mend it. It was just like how Huan Wen and Zhang Jiulu, at the last moment of Liang, had gone against each other. It was impossible to determine who was right and who was wrong. Su Fengyin slowly paced back and forth in the small courtyard that had returned to silence. Wang Sui led Bei Meng's elite cavalry on the eastern front to suddenly advance to the west, causing Bailiang to be in a rather awkward situation. This was probably what it meant when the heavens did not fulfill one's wishes. Yin Wenluan had no choice but to split up troops to guard the eastern gate of Yuzhou, where the troops were currently leaning to the north, in order to prevent a fire in the backyard. She was afraid that the entire Lingzhou would be engulfed in smoke. In this way, a few big fish would definitely slip through the gourd's mouth. Perhaps it would be Zhong Tan's private army, or perhaps it would be the Ruren cavalry of Hong Jingyan, or even Yang Yuanzhan himself. However, judging from the current situation, even if Dong Zhuo had realized that the situation at the gourd's mouth was not good and hurriedly sent troops to the gourd's mouth to coordinate with Yang Yuanzhan's troops, it would not change the outcome of the destruction of Liang Mang's main force on the eastern front. Yang Yuanzhan would definitely suffer the consequences of his radical actions of demolishing Huagong and Luanhe cities and burning all the forts and fences. Without these defensive forts that could be used as temporary strongholds of Beimeng, the pincer attack from Bailiang cavalry and Yuzhou infantry was enough to be fatal. The situation at the gourd's mouth was already set. The key was how many Beimeng fish Yuan Zuozong and Yu Luandao could catch in the end. One could foresee that Gu Jiantang would take the initiative to attack, and the Kainan and Heji border armies would also block Wang Sui's path back to the east. Everyone could see that this was an opportunity that Bailiang had created for the entire northern front of Liang. However, while Great Peace City was singing the praises of the emperor and Gu Jiantang, they would pretend to be blind and only focus on the fall of Huda's city in Liangzhou. Previously, the new Huai administrator Han Lin had vaguely reminded Su Fengyan that the imperial court was pushing to set up Jidushi in the territory of the dynasty. Although they only added one deputy Jidushi to the territories of the various vassal kings to restrict the vassal kings who had always been Jidushi, the person who had the chance to become the new deputy Jidushi was very likely to be Yang Xinxing, who was covered in dirt at Guangling Road. Su Fengyan muttered Yang Xinxing's name a few times. Yang Xinxing was one of the 8 great generals of Liang and was once the local emperor of Jizhou. In the second year of Xiangfu, he lived with his tail between his legs. This time, he risked his life to become the deputy Jidushi of Bailiang. He wanted to atone for his crimes with the young emperor and the Liang imperial court. He also wanted to help his eldest son, Yang Huchen, as the new deputy Jizhou general. Northern Liang, as well as Yang Xinxing herself. The 3 parties were well aware that if they went to northern Liangdao to be a Jidushi, regardless of whether they had the title deputy or not, their real power would not be comparable to a Dewey with the size of sesame seed mung bean. Maybe Yang Xinxing's request to be demoted to the northwest was because he was prepared to die. Chapter 1587. Because of Yang Xinxing, Su Fengyan thought of the entangled Jizhou, and then he thought of the complicated situation in the Tu Liao and Bailiang. He could not help but sigh at the invisible shadows of swords and blades outside the imperial court. These are the real killers. The small Jizhou involved Kainan, the nominal head of the military of the Lianghuai Dao. Although he had lost power, he still controlled nearly 10,000 elite cavalry of the Li family of Yanbao. Han Feng, who was personally roped in by the emperor of Liang, and Yang Huchen, who represented the return of his family's power to the old land. There was also the new king of Han, who did not bat an eyelid, and the interests of the group of civil officials behind Han Lin. As for the Tu Liao, whose territory was even larger, other than Gu Jiantang, who led the government on the surface, there was also Su Gong, who replaced the emperor as the assistant minister of the Ministry of War to patrol the borders. There was also Zhao Sui, who had been rooted for a long time, and the traditional power of the northern scholars led by the Peng family. There were 4 heroes. If one were to take them out and look at them individually, it would seem that each of them was well respected, but in reality, no one had a choice. Su Fengyan unconsciously stood at the foot of the wall of the small courtyard. He stretched out his palm and placed it on the wall, looking up at the top of the wall. The great building was about to collapse. Previously, through the intelligence reports from Fu Shui Fong and secret court reports from Liang, which were only sent to the provincial governors of each province, the situation of the Guangling Taoism war had already tipped in West Chu's favor. After Chao Chongqing led the navy to defeat Zhao Yi's navy on the second battlefield west of West Chu's capital, the 3 young men of West Chu once again shone brilliantly. Pei Sui, who had previously presided over the clamorous government affairs, assisted Xie Shibian, who had returned from the Western Front to preside over the defensive line. Together, they successfully blocked the river-crossing army led by Wu Zhongshuan, the #1 general of the southern frontier path. In addition, Su Yunxia, who had led 20,000 light cavalry to fight to the death against Yan Jinchuan's army, crossed the river and attacked the rear of the southern frontier army, cutting off 2 main supply routes. Not only did this slow down the pressure on West Chu's western front, it was also equivalent to breaking the plan of Li Yang's 4 fronts to encircle the capital. For West Chu, they had opened up a large and valuable strategic depth in the vast area south of the Guangling River. In order to coordinate with the Southern Frontier Army on the Western Front, Zhao Yi's army, which had chosen to quickly advance westward, suddenly fell into a situation where they were alone and deep in the enemy's territory. The 30,000 elite soldiers under Zhao Yi's command, who were skilled in mountainous warfare, were defeated by Chao Chongqing's 10,000 infantry and two groups of 3,000 light cavalry each. In just half a day, Zhao Yi's army had been completely annihilated. Were it not for the fact that the commander-in-chief of the southern expedition, Lu Xingxiang, had taken an unexpected move and led 5,000 cavalry into the southeastern battlefield, and then his 8,000 infantry had successively defeated the two cities of Yinma and Yangying, with the vanguard cavalry only 50 li away from the main force of West Chu, forcing West Chu to have no choice but to give up on advancing east in one spurt of energy. Perhaps Zhao Yi would have become the second Li Yang great feudal lord to die on the battlefield after the Duke of Huainan. It seemed that West Chu had won successive victories on the various battlefields like a hot knife through butter, ushering in the most prosperous state since the restoration of the country. However, Su Fengnian knew very well that this was just a scene of adding oil to the fire and flowers blooming. Capturing Lu Xingxiang at Yinma and Yangying was just a small test. When this general, who had resigned from his position as assistant minister of the Ministry of War, completely grasped the military power of the southern expedition, unless it was Chao Chongqing personally overseeing Guangling and Jiangbei, no one would be able to stop Lu Xingxiang's march to the south. His previous inaction was not as simple as Lu Xingxiang being hindered from all sides on the surface. It was because he needed to cooperate with the imperial court to weaken the military power of Zhao Yi, Zhao Ying, and the other feudal lords. In return, the Liang imperial court had tacitly approved of Lu Xingxiang's actions of waiting for the right price. As for Wu Zhongshuan falling into the mud of the Jiangbei battlefield, wasn't this a situation that Zhao Bing, who was watching the fire from the other side of the river, was happy to see? The true enemy that West Chu Su Yunxiao was going to face next would be the southern border elites under the king of Yan's valiant general, Wang Tongshan. Otherwise, the king of Yan's royal highness, who had killed the barbarian tribes of Nanjiang Path when he was young, would not have been unable to even put up a fight against Su Yunxiao's sneak attack, no matter how muddle-headed and incompetent he was, and how unaccustomed he was to the environment in Guangling Path. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed with schadenfreude. Little beggar, you are not feeling well right now. That General Wu must have completely turned to the imperial court. There is no other way. Your Nanjiang Path has already done nothing to reward him, but the imperial court is different. They can afford to give him the title of Jinan Great General, Minister of War, Shang Zhugua, and even de Zhugua. Perhaps after he dies, he can even receive a posthumous title as a general. Therefore, it is not your fault that you want to completely fall out with Wu Zhongshuan and watch as West Chu ruthlessly stabbed old Wu in the butt. Su Fengnian withdrew his palm. He bent his fingers and casually knocked on the wall. The sound was muffled. Today, Beiliang was fighting to the death against Bei Meng's million-strong army. Zhao Yi, who was known as the richest man in the world, had already wiped out his family's wealth in the face of West Chu. The old king of Jing and Zhao Heng sacrificed his own life in exchange for a hereditary title for his son. The Duke of Huainan, Zhao Ying, became the first vassal king to die on the battlefield since the spring and autumn period. After Zhao Sui of Liaodong surrendered, he was cautious for half his life. Originally, Zhao Bing, the king of Yan's army, was second only to Beiliang. In the blink of an eye, Wu Zhongshuan led all the northern troops of Nanjiang Path to seek refuge with the Liang imperial court. It could be said that his vitality was greatly damaged. All of this was naturally the scheme of the late Emperor Zhao Dan, Yuan Bunshi, and the former Grand Secretary Zhang Jilu. It had nothing to do with the current emperor. Su Fengnian sneered at the wall and said, "Zhao Zhuan, you are thousands of miles away from your father. When you finish using up the eternal Hui inheritance left by the older generation, do you think you can still easily control the world's general trend?" Gu Jiantang, Chen Jibao, Lu Xianxiang, Zhao Yuling, Yin Mao Chun. Which one of them can you recklessly control? Then Su Fengyan was silent for a long time. He asked himself, then what about me? There was no answer. At this moment, great ancestor Gu strode into the small courtyard. Even this famous general of the spring and autumn period could not suppress the excitement in his voice. His voice trembled as he said, Your Highness, there are 2 pieces of news. Su Fengyan smiled and said, 2 pieces of news? Then let's hear the bad news first. The good news later can be used to suppress the shock. Great ancestor Gu laughed loudly and said, I've disappointed your highness. Both pieces of news are great. In Liuzhou, Su Longxiang, Ko Jianghuai, and Shi Fu led 5,000 cavalry to Qingyuan. In Yuzhou, apart from the vanguard General Zhong Tan and Hong Jingyan, a portion of the Ruren cavalry escaped from the Gord. Including the General Yang Yuanzhan, there were 46 Beimang generals. All of them died in battle. A total of 16 huge temples were built in the Gord. In the second year of Xiangfu, Bailiang was at an absolute disadvantage in terms of military strength, especially when Liangzhou's Huda city was in danger of falling. Their 3 prefectures' border army lost more than 100,000 men in battle. They defeated Beimang with 350,000 men. Bailiang cavalry was the best in the world. Chapter 1588. The first 10 days of autumn were yellow. After the second year of Xiangfu entered autumn, a shocking piece of news quickly spread throughout the Yangtze River. It was rumored that West Chu's Xianxia was about to ascend the throne. This meant that this princess, who had been exiled for many years, would become the second female emperor after Beimang's Murong Empress. She would also be the first female emperor in the history of the Central Plains. In response to this, almost all of the West Chu civil and military officials, other than Su Yunxia, who guarded the Jiangbei stronghold, and Pei Sui, who was in charge of confronting Wu Zhongshuan's army in the south, including Chao Chongqing and Xie Shibian, all of the West Chu civil and military officials gathered in the capital. In comparison, the Liang Imperial Court's edict to confer Wu Zhongshuan the title of Southern Conquering General, and at the same time promoting General Hung Jiangsong, Li to General Jinan, was the deputy Jidushi of Guangling Path, and returning to Guangling Path to assist the Guangling King Zhao Yi in leading the army, seemed much more lackluster. As for the 2 young officials who secretly followed Song Li and temporarily held the position of Guanzhong of the Ministry of Works, in this changing situation, they became more and more inconspicuous. In just 2 short years, Yuan Gua, who had been the Minister of Rights and Revenue, was the favorite student of the old Zhang Lu, who was jokingly called the fire-relieving minister. He was not like his colleague Han Lin, who the young emperor had placed high hopes on, and was not like Wang Xiongwei, who had been demoted to the war-torn Guangling Path as expected by the great and officialdom. He was not like Wang Xiongwei, who had been demoted to the war-torn Guangling Path as a deputy Jidushi. Instead, he used the nondescript transitional identity of an imperial decree minister. After meeting Lu Xingxiang, he split up with Song Li and the others. Yuan Gua went to see Wu Zhongshuan, while Song Li led the 2 minor 7th-level official from the Ministry of Works to the manor of the vassal state Zhao Yi was in. As Yuan Gua, the son of Heaven's envoy, came closer, the atmosphere on the western front of Guangling, which was at a disadvantage in the battle situation, seemed to be unusual. Logically speaking, as the target of the conferment, Wu Zhongshuan should have been the most active, not to mention bringing a few Nanjiang generals out of the city to welcome him. At the very least, he should have prepared a welcoming feast for Yuan Gua. Not to mention whether or not Yuan Gua had a chance to make a comeback and return to the center of power. Even with the reputation Yuan Gua had accumulated in the great and officialdom over the years, Wu Zhongshuan, who was about to formally step into the Liang officialdom, could not be neglected. In the end, it was King of Jing and Zhao Sun who led the Qingzhou Navy General Wei Dong to welcome Yuan Gua. Wu Zhongshuan only attended a banquet held on a ship. Tang He and Li Chunyu, the 2 direct generals, did not appear. There was only an unfamiliar young man with the surname Jiang beside them. Before the banquet began, Yuan Gua expressionlessly announced the edict. The old General Wu Zhongshuan, who was wearing armor that did not suit the occasion, also expressionlessly received the edict. Among the large group of civil and military officials who had taken off their official robes, the clanging of armor on Wu Zhongshuan's body as he knelt and stood was particularly ear-piercing. This caused the table of delicacies and fine wine in the banquet that followed to taste like wax. It was extremely bland, and there was no joy to speak of. In the night, on the surface of the river some distance away from the Yellow Dragon ship, a Qingzhou warship that was responsible for patrolling the river tonight was motionless. Looking from here, one could only see the lanterns and colored banners on the ship and blurry figures. A young man in casual clothing was lying quietly on the railing with a cold smile on his lips. To the left of the young man stood Wang Xinji's second disciple, Gong Bonk, third disciple, Linya, and a tall woman with a hat on her head. The four people to the right were all in the prime of their lives. Without exception, they were all filled with a murderous aura. They were the Nanjiang infantry generals Zhang Dingyuan and Guing, the Yuanzhou general Yi Xiufeng, and the Hezhou general Yang Yu. All of the generals that the king of Yin Qi Bing could rely on were present. Among them, Wang Tongshan had once been the strongest general under the king of Yin Qi's command. But many years ago, he had entered the northern border of Nanjiang. This time, Wu Zhongshuan had been recruited by the court. Wang Tongshan, who was supposed to keep Wu Zhongshuan in check, showed signs of wanting to make a move. Zhao Zhu did not raise his head. He said with a slight smile, "Sister Lin, that person is Jiang Fuding of your martial emperor city?" The fifth Grandmaster Lin had a complicated expression as he nodded. Zhao Zhu rubbed his chin. "I'm puzzled. How did this person help Wu Zhongshuan get in touch with Great Peace City? This matchmaker is not something that any normal person can be." Lin wanted to speak, but stopped. Zhao Zhu turned to look at the female martial grandmaster who had made comment. He said with a smile, "Sister Lin, do not worry. Even if Wu Zhongshuan does not have Jiang Fuding as a matchmaker, he will still make eye contact with Great Peace City. It is just a matter of time. Even if I don't look at the monk, I will still look at the Buddha. I will not compete with the Jiang person. Haha. To be honest, this time, our old general Wu really can't bring himself to be happy. Didn't we agree on being conferred the title of Marquis and General? He did become the Southern Expedition Grand General, but he wasn't conferred the title of Marquis. Don't even mention being conferred the title of the first king of a dynasty with a different surname during the auspicious Talisman era. How is this different from being the number one great general in our southern border? 100,000 elite soldiers of Nanjiang, just to get a general of one of the four conquerors, it is a great loss. His Majesty the Emperor is not very generous in his actions this time." The tall female of mysterious identity said coldly, "It is not that the court is unwilling to make Wu Zhongshuan a marquis. The reason that they did not keep their promise is that the Guangling Road War is not going well. If they start to make generals now, when the dust settles, what will they be rewarded? I believe that Yuan Darren from Jing will meet with Wu Zhongshuan in private and make things clear." Zhao Zhu made a sound of acknowledgement. Those who are not in charge do not know the cost of daily necessities. Maybe if it was me sitting on the dragon throne, I would do the same. I would first trick Wu Zhongshuan onto the pirate ship before anything else. Zhang Dingyuan reminded softly, "His Royal Highness, Tang He and Li Chunyu are coming over on a small boat." Zhao Zhu joked, "Fortunately, Wang Tongshan isn't here for the time being. Otherwise, we would have been destroyed." Guing, who was as beautiful as a woman, said in a gloomy voice, "Let's not talk about that crazy Wang Tongshan. How dare Tang He and Li Chunyu come to see His Highness? Do they really think we don't dare to kill these two ingrates?" Zhao Zhu shook his head and said, "I really don't dare. I'm already an official of the imperial court. Besides, if we really kill someone, we'll only be letting that person from Western Shu reap the benefits. I'm not willing to do a business that hurts those close to me and benefits the enemy." A small boat didn't get too close to the battleship filled with experts. After stopping, Tang He and Li Chunyu bowed deeply, and the boat turned around and left. The fierce general of Nanjiang, Liang Yu, snorted coldly, his 5 fingers gripping the railing of the boat. Zhao Zhu said indifferently, A woman leaves her home when she is of age. Let them be. The atmosphere was heavy. Only the sound of the river could be heard. Water flows downwards, people walk upwards. Zhao Zhu suddenly turned his head and asked, Miss Zhang, that Yuan Gua is your father's student. If you want to meet him, I can help arrange it. The tall female said indifferently, No need. Zhao Zhu unconsciously reached out to touch the old money pouch at his waist. He smiled and sighed. Even if you have a knife, you can't kill a heartless dog. Chapter 1589. Zhao Zhu, who did not say a word, looked towards the northwest in a daze, revealing a worried expression. Although Nanjiang had its own outstanding spy system, it had never extended its hands to Beiliang, and Beiliang's Fu Shui Fang also tacitly did not place any pawns in Nanjiang. This kind of respect was not only because of Beiliang's 300,000-strong cavalry and Nanjiang's 200,000-strong army, nor was it because of the mutual fear between the two kings, Su Xiao and Zhao Bing, but more importantly, it was a kind of appreciation between heroes. This kind of feeling was like seeing all the heroes in the world and being the only one on the same level. And in Zhao Zhu's generation, how could he, the crown prince of Yin Qi, and the new Liang king, Su Fengyan, be ordinary friends? Previously, when he let Lin Honyuan of the Dragon Palace get involved in the purple dress of Mount Hui, he also told Su Fengyan that if worst came to worst, he could just give up on Beiliang. In the end, Nanjiang was still a path of retreat for him. Among the intelligence reports that Zhao Zhu had obtained, the furthest he could get was fragmented news from Huainan Dao. Now that Kai Nan and Han Lin were the provincial governor and administrator respectively, it seemed that they had purposely blocked off all the channels of military intelligence from northern Liang. All the post-house routes, large and small, were tightly sealed off. Even the court bulletin from the Liyang Imperial Court did not mention a single word about the current situation in northern Liang. Therefore, Zhao Zhu only knew that 20 days ago, Wang Sui had led the elite cavalry of the Eastern Front to raid northern Ji, then rushed to River Province, heading straight for the Helan mountain range located east of northern Liangzhou. It seemed like the battles in Liuzhou and Liangzhou were not favorable to Beiliang. In the calculations of Zhang Dingyuan, Gu Ying, Yi Xiufeng, and the others, the chances of Beiliang winning were extremely small. Unless they won on all three fronts, whether it was losing the mobile cavalry of Liuzhou, causing the west gate of Liangzhou to be wide open, or Yang Yuanzhan's army breaking through Xiaowang City and meeting up with Yang Yuanzhan's cavalry in Yuzhou, the Beiliang frontier army trapped in Liangzhou could only die in battle or wait for death. As for losing the central front of Liangzhou, there was no need to mention it. Zhao Zhu murmured softly, It's good if you lose. When the time comes, you and I will fight side by side. Zhao Zhu straightened his body and stretched out a hand, clenching his fist tightly. Unlike the stiff atmosphere of the banquet ship on the western front of Guangling, Zhao Yi and Zhao Yuang personally held a banquet for their former confidant and subordinate Song Li in the Prince of Guangling's mansion. For the first time, the Guangling magistrate Wang Xiongui, who had always been closed to guests, appeared. When Song Li mentioned that Wang Yuanran, the youngest son of Lord Wang, had entered the capital's Ministry of Rights and become the director of the department for purging officials, Wang Xiongui, who had been unable to conceal his gloominess, suddenly smiled. At the banquet, the two young officials temporarily observing politics in the Ministry of Works were ignored by everyone. After Song, Li personally blocked the wine for a young man, surnamed Liu. The shifty-eyed guest of the prince's mansion, Zhang Zhupa, was not on good terms with Song Li, who had returned to his hometown. One was the chief strategist of the Guangling Spring Snow Building, while the other was a distinguished and handsome man that Zhao Yi viewed as a lucky general. However, tonight, Zhang Zhupa found all sorts of reasons to punish himself by drinking 7 or 8 cups of wine to the point that his mustache was sticky. Crown Prince Zhao Yi's eyes were gloomy, but Zhao Yi was all smiles from beginning to end. The night after the banquet ended, 2 officials from the Ministry of Works, who had come to inspect the rivers and canals of Guangling, met in a side courtyard of the prince's mansion to drink wine. The man surnamed Liu was actually blind. The young man's surnamed son who had been dead drunk at the banquet, was not drunk at all. He leaned lazily on a graceful chair made of red sandalwood and poured a cup of wine for the blind young man across from him. He smiled and said, "Song Li did not have good intentions. He purposely blocked the wine for you." He was clearly reminding Zhao Yi to tell the Guangling prince's mansion that you, a minor official of the Ministry of Works, actually have a more special status than me, Sun Yin. The blind man Lu Xuan, who had entered and left the capital, sat upright and still. He was not as imposing as Sun Yin, who was famous throughout the capital. He said softly, "General Jinnan is after all an old man of the spring snow building. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring of water. This action is not excessive. Why not have Song Li treated him with courtesy?" It would not have been easy for Zhang Zhupa to smoothly find Sir Sun to discuss matters. Sun Yin laughed loudly and said, "Zhao Yi is already in such a miserable state. What else can he do other than smash a broken jar? He could have turned a blind eye and let Zhang Zhupa choose a tree to nest in. In any case, he could have saved some incense for Crown Prince Zhao Yuang. In this way, the court would have two generals, Song Li, Lu Xianxia, and Zhang Zhupa as a civil official. Only then would Zhao Yuang be able to steadily enjoy himself as a prince. Otherwise, when the world is peaceful and the power of the generals declines, without Zhang Zhupa's protection in the officialdom, any provincial governor from Guangling would be able to easily play Zhao Yuang to death." Lu Su smiled and said, "The general trend is like this. However, in the history books, are there any lack of tragic disasters caused by impulsive emperors?" Sun Yin curled his lips with a disdainful expression. Lu Su sighed and said, "For people like Zhao Yi, no matter how bad his reputation is or how unbearable he is compared to the other vassal kings, he is still worthy of the respect of us younger generations who have taken advantage of the situation." Sun Yin frowned but gradually restrained his arrogance. He joked, "Sir Lu, you're not that much older than me. You act like an old man." Lu Su did not make a sound. Sun Yin lowered his voice and said, "I am very curious. How did you convince His Majesty to make the decision to send Lu Baijia from the Ministry of War to Guangling as the provincial governor? For this reason, you have completely angered the entire Gangnam-do scholar group. You have to know that Yu Jiankong and the other old men all hope that Tang Shi Sword Immortal can temporarily stay away from trouble. They would rather be like Su Gong and be hidden by the court in the two Liao provinces and have his official career delayed for 2 or 3 years. That would be better than being the first bird to make a name for himself. Therefore, many people say that you have attached yourself to the Peng family of Liaodong in the north in Great Peace City. That is why you are causing trouble for the 4 major families of Gangnam-do." Lu Su raised his head and closed his eyes, looking at Sun Yin. Sun Yin smiled embarrassedly. He was clearly embarrassed. There was no point in playing tricks in front of a smart person like Lu Su. Sun Yin was being unkind. Lu Su went straight to the point and said, "Qianglong and Tananan did not want Lu Baijia to come to Guangling. On the one hand, they valued his talent. On the other hand, they cannot speak of it. After all, the Lu family and the Su family of Bailiang are in-laws. If history is a mirror, the so-called loyalty of the world is, in the end, the loyalty of the scholars. The loyalty of the people is nothing more than gaining the recognition of the scholars. The Lu family of Qingzhou entering Bailiang is already a warning. After that, there were scholars who went to Liangzhou and Wudong to debate Buddhism. At this time, Lu Baijia should not have come to Guangling, which is adjacent to Gangnam-do. However, if one does not have long-term considerations, one will have short-term worries. Once one has long-term considerations, most of them will have short-term worries. Sir Sun asked me how I convinced His Majesty. It was very simple. It was just one sentence. Let the current matter be. There is no need to worry about the short-term worries, and there is no need to worry about the future." Sun Yin grimaced. These words are a little overbearing. Lu Su raised his head and drank the wine in his cup. He laughed self-deprecatingly. "Of course, before leaving the capital, I had a long talk with the emperor. For this sentence, I said thousands of sentences." Lu Su put down his wine cup. Compared to fighting on the battlefield, Everyone is going to die. Lu Su, I'm just moving my lips. Is 100 times useless. Suning shook his head and laughed. 100 times useless scholar? Zhang Zhupa, Song Li, Zhao Yi, Zhao Yuang, and his son, Lu Baijie, Yuanghua, your old master Zhao Sun, Wu Zhongshuan, Lu Xianxiang, and the entire Guangling. Such a big chessboard. You and I, two small minister-counselors of the Ministry of Works, can maneuver freely here. How can we be useless? Lu Su lowered his head and looked at the table, just like when he sat in Yongzi Alley. There was a chessboard in front of him. Lu Su muttered to himself, there are wins and losses in chess, and there are profits and losses in gambling. However, for the sake of the emperor and the world, this kind of pointing out the country, our fingertips are all covered in blood. The last signing event of Shuizhong was held in Guangzhou. The specific address was Guangzhou Book Purchase Center, number 123 Tiana Road. There are many things that can be said when we meet. P.S. Do not bring blades and other things. Chapter 1590. In the eyes of the people of Liang, Beiliang was a land of death. It was only a matter of time before the people were plunged into misery and suffering. Thus, when a carriage traveled from Hezhou to Yuzhou and not from Beiliang to the outside, it seemed like they were going against the flow. The coachman was a one-armed man with one empty sleeve. He held the reins with only one hand and tried to control the carriage as steadily as possible. Fortunately, compared to the simple carriage, the horse pulling the carriage was rather tall and strange. The middle-aged coachman did not need to spend much effort to control it. An old man bent down slightly and lifted the coarse cloth curtain, blocking the wind and sand. His gaze passed over the one-armed man's shoulder and looked forward. He was silent and did not put down the curtain for a long time. The coachman turned his head and said softly, "Father, if I remember correctly, there's still a dozen li before we see the boundary marker between Yuzhou and Hezhou." The old man nodded, his expression somewhat absent-minded. The coachman frowned and said, "Even if Beiliang has never acknowledged the imperial court's edicts, Father is still the deputy administrator of Beiliang in name. Would that Su Fengyin dare to kill someone? Since this is the case, why would Father lower yourself to curry favor with Beiliang? If word gets to the capital..." The old man left the carriage and sat behind his son. He waved his hand and interrupted the temporary coachman's words. He smiled and said, "So what if some rumors get to Great Peace City? The foundation of the Yang family has never been in the center of the imperial court. Ever since the defeat of Guangling Taoism, and your father went to the capital as a criminal, from His Majesty the Emperor to a little 6th or 7th rank official of the Ministry of War, who has treated Father well. Other things aside, the tens of thousands of old soldiers of Ji province that Father raised were taken away by the imperial court just like that. When you go to Ji province as a deputy general, you're only allowed to bring 3,000 soldiers and horses. This is built on the premise that you need to keep Yuan Tingshan in check. Otherwise, don't even think about bringing a single soldier back to Ji province." The coachman was none other than Yang Huchen, who had lost an arm in the battle against the remnants of West Chu. Now, together with Han Fong, the descendant of valiant bravery, whose family had their grievances redressed, he was the deputy general of Jizhou. Yang Huchen not only had to prevent Yuan Tingshan from raising troops in Jizhou, which was an important border area, but he was also a chess piece for the Zhao clan in Liang to monitor the king of Han, Zhao Xiong. The old man was, of course, Yang Xinxing, the newly appointed deputy administrator of Beiliang. He was one of the 8 great generals of the 4 campaigns and 4 towns in the past. In the past year, he had lived a miserable life in the capital where he was bullied by dogs. Not only did he have to live in fear, he was also laughed at by his colleagues in the officialdom. From time to time, he would be dragged out to drink, although they said that they were helping the old general drink to relieve his worries. In fact, it was more or less the same as being dragged out to walk a monkey. They would find ways to sprinkle salt on the old man's wound. When it came to the skill of observing people and adding insult to injury, almost all the officials in the capital were great masters. If Yang Huchen had not been appointed deputy general of Jizhou by the Ministry of War, which meant that the emperor had not completely lost his patience with the Yang family, It was likely that the people sent off by the old man this time would not have been a few kittens and puppies, but none. This time, the old man passed through Jingji, West Ji, and Ji River. Although the old man did not have the intention of forming relationships with people, the fact that no one showed any interest along the way still made Yang Huchen, as his son, feel bitterly disappointed. Thinking back to the year when the Yang family sent troops from Jizhou to Guangling, what a grand occasion it was. At that time, if one was not at the level of county chief, one could not even think about getting a seat at the Yang family's private banquet. Probably sensing Yang Huchen's anger, the old man patted his son's shoulder and laughed softly. Huchen, you can't blame the world for being so cold. Ever since I became a general, the Yang family has been used to doing whatever they want in Jizhou. We're not good people. The Yang family has bullied men and women many times. Now that we have suffered retribution, it is normal. Yang Xianxia looked around. The scenery in Hezhou was not very different from Jizhou. After all, they were both at the northwest border. After autumn, the grass was yellow like dirt. It could not compare to the beautiful scenery in Jiangnan, where half of the city was green. The old man slowly closed his eyes and took a deep breath. On the other hand, retribution comes early, which is a good thing. If it comes too late, perhaps the court won't even give you the chance to be deputy general of Jizhou to make up for your mistakes. Besides, compared to that old man, Yin Jinchuan, who has already died on the battlefield, I am much luckier. Don't look at how Zhao Kuei is only second to Lu Shengxiang in the southern expedition. Right now, that old man is like an ant on a hot pan. I dare to bet with you that if he loses the battle, he may not even be able to compare to Yin Jinchuan, much less me. That is because the favor the court has given us old generals has been used up on me and Yin Jinchuan. Thus, Father's mood when he left the capital this time was not as bad as others thought. In truth, after leaving that great peace city that made people tread on thin ice, Father's mood was much better. Along the way, I thought through many things. Yang Huchen was relieved of a great burden. No matter what, as long as his father did not have too many worries in his heart, it was a good thing. He was confident that he could lead the Yang family to rise again. Yang Xianxia smiled. This time, I had someone send a secret letter to Mount Qingliang in private, pleading Beiliang to send an envoy to the Yuzhou border to receive me. As long as I don't see them, I, Yang Xianxia, will not take a step into Beiliang. I will just wait at the border. I, Yang Xianxia, was once a general. Now I am putting on such a humble and pitiful attitude. Of course, this cannot be considered heroic behavior, but so what? Everyone in the capital is waiting for the news of my sudden death in Beiliang to spread, or for Su Fengnian to wantonly humiliate me on some occasion. I will not let them have their wish. Face is fake, but inside is real. The Yang family is in a precarious situation. Father is the face of the Yang family in the court. If it is gone, then it is gone. As long as you, Huchen, can stand firm in Jizhou again in 5 or 10 years, the face will run back to the Yang family. At that time, even if you don't want it, perhaps other people will be willing to kneel and beg you to accept it. Chapter 1591. Yang Huchen lowered his head, his eyes slightly red. His father, who had never acknowledged his old age, General Yang, who had always been indomitable for as long as he could remember, actually made him feel that he was really old. Yang Xianxia sighed. I'm just afraid that the young king of Beiliang will take his anger out on the Yang family because of the court. He will be dissatisfied with you because father is the deputy provincial governor. After all, Jizhou is not far from Beiliang. In the past, Su Xiao, because of old ties, rarely ordered people outside of Beiliang. Now, Su Fengnian is in charge. Looking at the movements of Beiliang in the last few years in Su Fengnian's hands, it is clear that Beiliang is very aggressive and no longer purposely hides its edge. In the end, Beiliang and the court were only a step away from tearing into each other. Father's death this time is a risk, but also an opportunity. Huchen, focus on being the deputy general of Jizhou. Father has his own plans in Beiliang. From now on, remember a few things. First, do not entertain any of the old local generals of Jizhou. Second, control the distance between you and Han Fang. Finally, Get close to the new administrator Han Lin. You must act as his lackey. In the future, Han Lin will be crucial for the Yang family to have a place in Great Peace City. Han Lin is not like other students of Zhao Yuling. On the surface, he is not as good as Zhao Yuling, Yin Maochun, or even Yuanghua and Wang Xiongui. But in the eyes of the current emperor, Han Lin is the most important person. The reason is very simple. The three of them were all first-class officials promoted by the previous emperor, almost to the point where they could not be titled. Yuanghua and Han Lin were people who had been placed in important positions by the emperor after he ascended the throne. Unfortunately, Yuanghua's performance was not good, and he has been completely abandoned. In this way, the emperor will place all his hopes on Han Lin. This is the greatest advantage for Han Lin. Han Lin seems to be the one with the least sharp edges in the Zhonglu back in the day, but it is precisely this kind of mediocrity that is not the same as mediocrity that is the greatest reliance in the officialdom. The longer it lasts, the more powerful it becomes. Yuanghua is a counterexample. For some reason, the more Yang Huchen listened, the heavier his heart became. Yang Xianxia smiled lightly. Does it sound like I'm giving you my last words? Huchen, you are mistaken. Father just said that on this trip to Baoyang, Father does not have the slightest thought of dying and will not stand up for the face of the court. Yang Huchen was slightly embarrassed. Yang Xianxia said earnestly, ever since the nomads of the Great Qin dynasty turned into deep-rooted influential clans, the martial artists of our generation who carried the sabers in their hands have never had a glorious record in the history books. Those important figures who left their names behind were always associated with the four words of feudal towns. But the aristocratic clans who held the brush in their hands were usually associated with several generations of dukes. Even if they had been passed down for 100 years, they could not be called influential clans. Most of them had a history of 200 or 300 years, or even longer. To be able to enjoy the glory of 3 generations for 50 years was already a miracle. Right now, don't look at how the imperial court is suppressing the power of local generals and how everyone is in danger. Compared to those old fellows like Yin Jinxuan and Zhao Cheng, Father is looking further ahead. In the future, there might be a century-old surname belonging to a general in Liang. To achieve this, the blindly loyal Han family is a good example, but the Baoyang Su family is. At this point, Yang Xianxia suddenly stopped talking. In the end, she only let out a long sigh. Su Xiao is not a formidable person. Yang Huchen was a little confused. The world recognized Su Xiao as an arrogant and unruly general. If he wasn't an ambitious and ruthless person, could he be a hero? Yang Xianxia smiled and asked, Huchen, who do you think Baoyang will send to the border of Yuzhou to be the bad guy? Yang Huchen, who had long thought about this question, said softly, logically, it should be Yozhou's provincial governor Hu Kuei or Yozhou's general Huang Fuji. But now the war is in full swing, and these two may not be able to get away. But even if Baoyang wants to embarrass Father, I think they will send a Yuzhou county governor. As for Li Gongda and Song Dongming, who are nominally of the same rank as Father, the possibility is very small. After all, one of them is in charge of Mount Qingliang, and the other is in charge of the construction of a new city. I don't expect Su Fengnian to mobilize so many people. Besides, if one of them really does come to Yuzhou, I will suspect that Su Fengnian is harboring evil intentions. When the time comes, whether Father agrees or not, I will personally escort Father all the way to Liangzhou. Dozens of miles passed in the blink of an eye. When Yang Huchen saw the boundary steel by the roadside, he also saw 4 or 5 riders quietly waiting by the roadside. Among them, one rider was particularly eye-catching. Other than his young age, there was also a strange feeling about him that Yang Huchen felt. It was just like when he first saw a legendary martial grandmaster in his youth. It was like seeing a tall mountain. Just like when he met the emperor for the first time in the imperial palace of Great Peace City last year. He felt like he was facing an abyss. Yang Huchen even forgot to turn his head. With a trembling voice, he said, Father, it seems like he's come in person. Yang Xianxia had been sitting in the carriage with his eyes closed since approaching the border. When he heard Yang Huchen's trembling voice, he was somewhat puzzled. Could it be that Huang Fuji had arrived? Or perhaps Li Gongda and Song Dongming had come in person? Otherwise, given his son's temperament, there was no way he would be so flustered. The heavy-hearted Yang Shenxing lifted the curtain. It was noon, and for a moment, the sunlight above his head was rather dazzling. The old man squinted his eyes and looked over. When he clearly saw that rider, Yang Shenxing froze on the spot. Suddenly, this old man, who had not lost his fighting spirit even after entering the tiger's den of Baoyang, truly felt for the first time that he was indeed old. Without waiting for Yang Shenxing to get off the carriage, that rider galloped over first. He glanced at Yang Huchen, the fierce general of Liang who was acting as the coachman, and then said to Yang Shenxing with a smile, "Lord Yang has a good son." Yang Huchen was speechless when he heard the young man's comment. The old man, who was not addressed as Great General Yang, laughed out loud. He was not angry at all and said loudly, "In this regard, Yang Shenxing is far inferior to the Great General." Yang Shenxing, who had once been a great general, respectfully addressed him as Great General. In the Liang dynasty, there was only Su Xiao. Chapter 1592. Su Fengyin leaped off the horse, and Yang Shenxing followed suit. They walked side by side, while Su Fengyin introduced the group of people to the newly appointed deputy military governor. It turned out they were the local officials led by the county chief of Tangshan County. They were brought here purely to broaden their horizons. After all, Su Fengyin did not take Yang Shenxing seriously, but to the local officials of Tangshan County, this local emperor of Ji province was a name that reverberated like thunder in their ears. It was especially true for the Ji province infantry under Yang Shenxing's command, who were known to be unrivaled in the world. It had been a long time since they had the intention to compete with Yin Wanluan's Yuzhou army. Today, they were able to meet the old General Yang, which was a great topic to talk about after a meal. Su Fengyin asked the old man if the journey to the west was smooth, and Yang Shenxing answered with a smile. The atmosphere was so harmonious that it confused the officials of Tangshan County. As a matter of fact, although Yang Shenxing appeared to be regretting not having met the young lord earlier, he was actually sweating. Baoyang had even refused to accept the imperial edict. Now that Baoyang was in a state of turmoil and chaos, it was not a big deal to leave 1 or 2 corpses in the wilderness. Would the imperial court be willing to get to the bottom of the matter if they were labeled as bandits? The more friendly Su Fengyin was, the more uneasy Yang Shenxing was. Just as Yang Huchen had speculated, given Yang Jialong's difficult situation, it was already a great honor for him to be welcomed by the Yuzhou provincial governor. Yang Shenxing was not arrogant enough to think that he was qualified enough for the king of Baoyang to leave the front line to welcome him. Fortunately, Su Fengyin did not keep Yang Shenxing in suspense. He asked all the officials of Tangshan County to return to their residences and then stopped at a small tea stall beside the post road to rest. He woke up the woman who was dozing off and ordered 3 cups of tea with a smile. After sitting down, he told Yang Shenxing directly, "I came to Yuzhou to pick someone up. After drinking tea, I will soon leave for Helan Mountain in the northeast of Yuzhou. Wang Sui and his tens of thousands of Beiman cavalry are still waiting at the gate of Yuzhou. If I arrive late, I'm afraid I won't be able to see the famous prince consort of Dongyue." Yang Shenxing's expression did not change as he hummed in agreement. He was calculating quickly in his mind. This time, he had left the capital with the embroidery title of Deputy Provincial Governor of Baoyang. He was treated as a cold stove that had been doused with cold water. He did not exchange any letters on the way and did not have any contact with anyone on the way. He was completely blind to the situation in the world. He only knew what happened before he left the capital. Huta City had fallen and Dongzhuo's army had been able to spread out the front line, causing the first line of defense outside Liangzhou Pass to be in danger. Yang Shenxing even thought that when he approached Yuzhou, he would see a large number of refugees hastily fleeing Baoyang. However, Su Fengyin casually mentioned that he was going to Helan Mountain to confront Wang Sui's cavalry. Yang Shenxing was shocked. Could it be that Baoyang was prepared to give up the entire battlefield outside Liangzhou Pass? Half a year ago, there were still a large number of Bailiang-related war reports that were frequently sent to the capital from Bailiang. Bailiang did not deliberately block these reports. However, since the beginning of spring in the second year of Xiangfu, it was very difficult for the Zhaoguo spies and the officials of Huai and Huai to obtain first-hand information about Bailiang. Yang Xinxing heard that a few of the Zhaoguo strongholds that committed crimes were uprooted. Some of the spies disguised as Jianghu people who followed Xianyuan Qingfeng to Liangliang seemed to have been quickly detained by the Fushui room. When Su Fengyin took the teacup from the woman's hand, Yang Huchen could not help but roll his eyes. When a woman brought tea to the father and son, she directly knocked the teacup on the table. However, when she gave the young vassal king tea, she held the teacup with both hands and walked to the table. Her thick waist was also swaying like a big water snake. She was not in a hurry to put the teacup on the table. When Su Fengyin reached out to take the teacup, she naturally touched him lightly. The woman took advantage of him, but did not stop immediately. She laughed and teased him. "Handsome young man, do you have a wife? If not, there's a beautiful girl in our village. Auntie will be your matchmaker." This shocked Yang Huchen to the core. Were all women in Bailiang so fierce? What was even more strange was that Su Fengyin did not get angry. Instead, he smiled and teased him a few times. His skin was as thin as the skin of a scoundrel in the marketplace. However, his words made the woman embarrassed for the first time. Yang Huchen suddenly felt a little unhappy. As a first-class general who had been on the battlefield for a long time, Yang Huchen did not have a good impression of this new Prince Liang. Now that he saw Su Fengyin's frivolous words and actions with his own eyes, Yang Huchen frowned even more. But for some reason, Yang Huchen saw the smile on his father's face from the corner of his eyes. It did not seem to be fake. It was quite like a veteran who saw a rising star. Yang Huchen was a little confused. Su Fengyin took a sip of tea. His next words scared Yang Huchen so much that he almost dropped the bowl. On the central front, Dongzhu's army has been attacking Huayang Pass for a long time without success and has retreated. The situation at Liuzhou is the most tragic. Less than a tenth of the 30,000 long Xiang army survived. Lu Gui led the remnants of his army and fled to Longyao province. As for outside Gormouth of Yuzhou, Yang Yuanzhan is dead. Zhong Tan and Hong Jingyan have disappeared without a trace. Yang Xinxing lowered his head to drink the tea. His expression could not be seen clearly, but the ripples on the surface of the teacup continued to ripple. Yang Huchen subconsciously blurted out, "That's impossible." Yang Xinxing suddenly raised his head and angrily said, "Huchen, do not be impudent." Yang Xinxing put down the teacup and turned to Su Fengyin and said apologetically, "Your Highness, Huchen has been extremely rude. Please forgive me." Su Fengyin said playfully, "Forgive what? I, Su Fengyin, am not the emperor of Liang. How can I punish a deputy general of Ji province?" Yang Xinxing's forehead was covered with sweat. Yang Huchen clenched his fist and pressed it against his knee under the table. He did not care about being scolded by the old man. He stared into Su Fengyin's eyes and asked, "Bailiang really defeated Beimang's 1 million iron cavalry?" Su Fengyin did not answer the question and slowly said, "Bailiang has lost a lot of people." Yang Xinxing said sternly, "Yang Huchen, you shut up." After meeting the emperor, Yang Huchen received a wonderful evaluation of loyalty and filial piety. At this time, the veins on his neck were bulging. He turned a deaf ear to the old man's reproach and stared with his eyes wide open. It was as if he was willing to risk his life to compete with the young king. Su Fengyin smiled and said, "Whether it is you, Yang Huchen, or your father, is it worth lying to me?" The one-track-minded Yang Huchen asked, "Dare I ask Wang Yi, how did Bailiang win 3 battles at the same time?" Without waiting for Su Fengyin to speak, Yang Xinxing stood up and slapped his son's head. "Bastard, no one will think you are mute if you don't speak." The man, who was the deputy general of Jizhou, was hit by his own father until his hair was disheveled, but he still did not give up. He gritted his teeth and asked, "Wang Yi, Bailiang really defeated the Beimang barbarians?" Su Fengyin nodded and said, "They won." Yang Xinxing almost sent this bastard flying with a kick. Su Fengyin waved his hand at the old man. Official Yang, it's fine. Yang Xinxing stomped his foot and said bitterly, Wang Yi, it's not that I'm boasting, but if it wasn't for Hu Qin's stubbornness, with his ability to lead troops, he would have been able to go to Great Peace City and become one of the 4 generals with real power. I really don't trust him to deal with the officials of Great Peace City. Wang Yi, look at him. When his bad temper comes up, he doesn't even know what's important in front of you. If he went to Jing, it would be terrible. Don't talk about losing his position. He might even lose his head. Su Fengyin smiled and said, General Yang is only suitable to lead troops in a local area. If he became an official at the foot of the emperor, he wouldn't be as good as those people who have already become shrewd. Even if General Yang became one of the 4 generals, he wouldn't be happy. Chapter 1593. Yang Xinxing sighed. That's right. That's why Hu Qin volunteered to go back to Jizhou. I didn't stop him. I couldn't have stopped him anyway. Yang Hu Qin muttered in a daze. One? Really one? Su Fengyin joked, what? General Yang doesn't want Bailiang to win? Aren't you afraid that your father will come all the way to Bailiang only to find the road filled with Beimeng cavalry? Yang Hu Qin, who had finally returned to life with great difficulty, subconsciously reached out a hand to touch his empty sleeve. Losing an arm is something that I, Yang Hu Qin, have never thought of as much. It is just that in the end, it is still a bit regretful that it was cut down by our own people on the battlefield and not outside the Great Wall, lost under the blades of the Northern Mang barbarians. Yang Hu Qin grinned and suddenly stood up, scaring the old man to the point that he trembled. Yang Xinxing was afraid that this guy would contradict Su Fengyin again. He raised his hand and pressed on his son's shoulder. Sit down and talk. Yang Hu Qin shook his head and raised his teacup. He said to Su Fengyin in a serious tone, Prince, there's no wine. Let Yang Hu Qin be so bold as to use tea instead of wine to toast you and all Bailiang soldiers. Northern Liang had achieved the biggest wish of Yang Hu Qin in this life. No matter what kind of bullshit situation Liang and Northern Liang would face in the future, I, Yang Hu Qin, would owe you a bowl of wine. If you were to die on the battlefield of Liangmang one day, I would lead my troops to the battlefield where you died and offer you a toast. If Su Fengyin dies at the hands of the Liang Imperial Court in the future, I will go to the execution ground alone to toast you with a bowl of wine. Yang Xinxing closed his eyes. Hu Qin, this child, really wanted to die. How could he say such rebellious and unlucky words? But unexpectedly, Su Fengyin also raised his teacup and stood up. He smiled. I have to drink this bowl of tea instead of wine. Also, if you, Yang Hu Qin, have the opportunity to come to Bailiang in the future, regardless of whether I'm dead or alive, remember to bring me a jar of good wine. How can one bowl be enough? Su Fengyin and Yang Hu Qin both drank their tea in one gulp. In the distance, the middle-aged woman who couldn't hear the conversation clearly turned around and glanced at the 3 guests. While she was tidying up, she grumbled, These men are really something. Drinking tea that costs only a few copper coins, yet they still have lofty aspirations? You're so particular. After drinking the tea, the former number 1 general of Ji province, Yang Hu Qin, took his leave and returned. Yang Xinxing, who still had lingering fear, laughed and scolded. Get out of here. Su Fengyin and Yang Xinxing sat back down on their stools. The woman hurriedly picked up the teapot and poured another bowl of tea for the 2 of them. Su Fengyin smiled and said, Lady boss, don't just add tea without adding tea leaves. That's not very kind. Earlier, a bowl of tea cost 2 copper coins. Now, these 2 bowls are only 1 copper coin per bowl. The woman pinched Su Fengyin's arm lightly with 2 fingers and laughed angrily. Fine, fine, fine. 1 copper coin it is. Just take it as Annie taking advantage of you. It's not that Annie wants to criticize you, but you're quite handsome. Judging from your accent, you're also from Bailiang. Why are you not straightforward at all? Annie may think you're pleasing to the eye, but if I really have to choose a man to spend my days with, I'd still choose that rough man for my family. Su Fengyin smiled evilly and said, Yes, yes, yes. You have a strong body and strength. The woman blushed and glared at him, and said, "Little guy, you have a glib tongue. You look like a scholar, and a dabbler who can't even pass the exams." In the end, the woman hesitated and asked, unwilling to give up, "You really don't want Annie to be the matchmaker?" Su Fengyan laughed loudly and shook his head. "I already have a wife." At this moment, Yang Xinxing sighed. Beiliang was indeed not the same as Li Yang. Su Fengyan restrained his smile and said softly, "People in poor places have a hard life. But while many people suffer, they don't accept their fate." Yang Xinxing nodded and said, "The elite soldiers of the world are from Liaodong and Lianglong. The ancient saying is not without reason." Su Fengyan asked, "Official Yang, there are two paths. One is to be a deputy provincial governor who has nothing to do and spend the rest of your life in Mount Qingliang." Without waiting for Su Fengyan to say the second path, Yang Xinxing said lightly, "Prince, I'll choose this path. I'm old and can't afford to be tossed around. Moreover, even if I leave the capital, I'm still in Jizhou." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "Fine. Our Beiliang isn't big, and the scenery can't be compared to the Central Plains. But in any case, Mount Wudong can avoid the summer heat. Outside the Great Wall, Lingzhou is also a good place to spend the winter. Whenever you feel bored in Mount Qingliang, you can walk around." Yang Xinxing wanted to say something, but stopped. The old man didn't dare to believe that Su Fengyan would be so magnanimous. To be able to tolerate Yang Huchen's offense, and even allow Yang Xinxing to enjoy life in Beiliang. If it were someone else who came to Beiliang to be a deputy provincial governor, they wouldn't be able to enter Yuzhou. Su Fengyan looked into the distance and said softly, "Yang Huchen has a father who makes him willing to be a driver." Su Fengyan, didn't jump out of stone. "Of course, I have my own reasons. My father, Su Xiao, has old debts in this life. Some of the debts he owes him have been repaid, some of them have not been repaid. There are also those he owes others, some of which he has repaid, some of which he is destined to never be able to repay." Su Fengyan glanced at the old man who had clearly forgotten a certain part of the past and smiled. Back then, there was a Liang commandant who, after losing to the king of Dongyue in succession, had saved up some money, but no one was willing to sell him several hundred soldiers. At the time, there was only one general called Yang Xinxing. Although he was also unwilling to sell his men, he was the only one who didn't make sarcastic remarks. One time, on the way to the Ministry of War's Yamen, he even took the initiative to chat with him. Many years later, that old man, who was no longer a junior commandant, told his son that one should hold a grudge, but one should also remember the good of others. Among them, he mentioned a general called Yang Xinxing who led soldiers into battle. He wasn't good, but he was passable as a person. Yang Xinxing said sadly, "So there was such an old story. I've already forgotten about it. I didn't expect the great general to still remember and even tell your highness about it." Afterwards, the old man stroked his snow-white beard and chuckled. Yang Xinxing, should be content to have the great general personally say that I'm passable. Of course, as a general, Yang Xinxing, am still somewhat unconvinced that I'm not good at war, even if it was the great general who said it." Su Fengyan didn't comment on this. He smiled and said, "In a moment, there will be people escorting official Yang to Liangzhou. I won't be seeing you off." Yang Xinxing nodded and said, "As it should be. I wouldn't dare delay your highness's journey." Su Fengyan paid the bill. Very quickly, dozens of horses galloped over from the post house. Among them, there was a large horse with no rider. Yang Xinxing mounted the horse and cupped his fist to Su Fengyan. "Your Highness, farewell." Su Fengyan made a sound of acknowledgement. "Let's meet again in Liangzhou." The woman from the tea stall, who had been shocked by the dozens of horses, opened her mouth wide. She carefully pricked up her ears when she heard the title of Your Highness. After the cavalry was far away, she moved closer to Su Fengyan and asked curiously, "Young man, your name is quite strange. Your surname is Wang, and your name is Yi. Your parents are really generous with their names. However, from the looks of it, your father is a general of Beiliang, right? How about you take the money for the tea back?" Su Fengyan, who was actually going to Lingzhou and not the Helan Mountains, shook his head and said with a smile, If in another 2 years, proprietress, you can still sell tea here peacefully, and I happen to come here to drink tea, can you give me a discount? How about it? The woman smiled and said, Sure, it's just a few copper coins. At most, I'll just scold my husband for being a wastrel. Sigh. It's a pity that when the time comes, I won't dare to touch you anymore. Su Fengyin said helplessly, You're still the one with a big heart. Strands of sunlight shone through the shade of the trees and fell on the small table, benches, and teacups. It was quiet and peaceful. Yang Xianxia, who was on horseback, looked back and vaguely saw the scene. For some reason, the old man in Bailiang had a thought. It was the Central Plains. Chapter 1594. Su Fengyin led a dark cavalry warhorse along the edge of the post house. Just like how Yang Xianxia had many reservations in his words, Su Fengyin naturally would not reveal everything to Yang Xianxia. The place he was going to next was not the Helan Mountains, where the army was pressing down on the border, but Lingzhou, which supported more than half of Bailiang's tax revenue. Even more secretive was that Su Fengyin had already met Wang Sui. At the time, Su Fengyin had only brought 800 White Horse loyalists with him, while Wang Sui had led Bei Meng's winter imprisonment, Wang Jingchong, and several hundred personal soldiers to separate from the main army and meet in secret. Su Fengyin was in no hurry to Lingzhou. He sank into deep thought. Even though he had met with the commander of Bei Meng's Eastern Front, he still did not understand what Wang Sui was planning. It was clearly Wang Sui who had asked for this secret meeting, but when they actually met, Wang Sui did not say anything serious. In their conversation, other than talking about old friends and old matters, it was more like an elder meeting a somewhat promising nephew. However, while implicitly praising the younger generation, the old man did not forget to boast about his past glory. This made Su Fengyin feel very helpless, and he very easily thought of Su Xiao, who had retired in Mount Qingliang. During this time, Wang Sui mocked the situation in Liang, saying that each crab was worse than the last. Whether it was the talents of the court officials or the knowledge of the scholars, they were declining with each generation. He even cursed the 2 emperors of Liang as cowards, saying that they could only beat domestic dogs if they couldn't beat a wild wolf. They didn't dare to fight to the death with Bei Meng, so they could only deal with the remnants of West Chu. Although Su Fengyin did not agree, it did feel rather good to hear. In the end, Wang Sui took advantage of his seniority to pat Su Fengyin on the shoulder. Without another word, he swaggered off. From the beginning to the end, Wang Sui had only said one thing that hit the nail on the head. Since Wang Sui hadn't been able to reap any benefits from his hunting trip to the west, no one on the Eastern Front would be willing to make things difficult for Bailiang. Su Fengyin understood what the old man was implying. It was not that Bei Meng had given up on the Eastern Front, because most of the troops garrisoned on the Eastern Front of Bei Meng that were confronting Gu Jiantang were conservative forces on grassland. They had no intention of attacking Bailiang in the first place, and were more inclined to break through the gap between the 2 Liao and Great Peace City. Therefore, Wang Sui's obstruction at the eastern gate of Bei Meng was very likely to give the peace order in Dong Zhuo a fatal blow. It was precisely these words that dispelled Su Fengyin's thoughts of trying to kill someone. He only chatted with the old man and did not act in the end. Thus, this trip to Helan Mountain could not be said to be a pleasant surprise, but at the same time, it could not be said to be a disappointment. For Bailiang, who had been seriously injured in the Battle of Liangmang, as long as there was no bad news, it was already good news. Thus, as long as Yang Xinxing did not come to Bailiang to take up the post of deputy Jidushi, Su Fengyin did not mind giving Yang Xinxing a stable life. He could even take the initiative to help this old man accumulate some merits, so that Yang Xinxing would not be in a difficult position. Bailiang and Su Fengyin did this to Yang Xinxing, and it was the same to Administrator Han Lin of Lianhuai. Of course, this kind of forbearance could not be said to be hearty, nor could it be said to be chivalrous. Su Fengyin finally flipped onto the horse. Before he whipped the horse forward, he looked to the east. The woman at the tea stall was bored to death as she sat on a bench. She raised her head to look at the back of the scholarly young man on his horse, going further and further away on the post road. She thought about the scene of this handsome young man bargaining with her and smiled. She thought to herself that this young man's background was definitely not bad, but he was even haggling over a few copper coins. He really knew how to live his life. The capital of Lingzhou was filled with celebration. This kind of celebration came from top to bottom like the spring wind and rain. The people did not know why the city suddenly became lively again. Naturally, they guessed that there was a great victory outside Liangzhou Pass and Yuzhou Calabash Pass. However, there was no news that spread out, so no one could be sure. However, during this period of time, one could often see high-ranking officials and nobles, especially the important people of the general family, getting drunk. What was strange was that it was different from the past, where the general children of the same generation would drink and chat merrily. This time, it was mostly a family or a few families that were separated by generations celebrating together. Some of the local wealthy families that were usually at odds with each other. Now that they met on the narrow road in a restaurant, there was no hostile atmosphere, and they passed by with a smile. In the dusk, a number of riders coincidentally stepped on the gate and entered the city, heading straight for Song Yan's mansion in Lingzhou. The gatekeeper was a clever person. He saw that although the riders were not wearing armor, they did not look like ordinary retainers of a rich and powerful family. Instead, they were elite soldiers with cold blades hanging at their waists. Song Yan, who received the gatekeeper's report, quickly walked out. When he saw Su Fengnian standing on the street with a horse, he was stunned. Su Fengnian had someone free up a horse for this Lingzhou political elder who admired legalism. The two of them slowly rode toward the provincial governor's residence. Song Yan's expression was emotional as he asked softly, "My lord, did we really win?" It seemed like Yang Huchen was not the only one who found it unbelievable. Even Song Yan, a member of Bailiang, did not dare to believe the intelligence reports from the border. Due to Su Fengnian's considerations, he did not announce the victory at the border with great fanfare in Bailiang. Even Song Yan, a lower third-rank official with real power, could only learn about the final results of the 3 battlefields from the simple intelligence reports. Su Fengnian nodded and said, "It was a Pyrrhic victory." Song Yan's face suddenly flushed red and his lips trembled. This stubborn scholar, who could straighten his back when he first met His Royal Highness, was speechless for a moment. Su Fengnian sighed and said, "This battle can still be fought. However, there shouldn't be too big of a battle in the next half a year. The border army can take a breather for now, but your Lingzhou will be in a terrible fix. You will only be busier than before." Song Yan smiled and said, "Compared to the other 3 provinces, only Lingzhou is far away from the smoke of war. For us peace officials, being a bit busy is nothing. I have only heard of people dying on the battlefield. Rarely have I heard of people dying from exhaustion in the officialdom." Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment. He looked at the bustling streets that were bustling even at night and said softly, "Su Beiji is going to step down from his position as Lingzhou provincial governor and take over from Tian Peifong as Liangzhou provincial governor. However, the position that Su Beiji vacated, Su Fengnian did not finish his words. Song Yan remained silent. He did not reveal an expression of resentment, nor did he say anything like a civil official who only cared about the well-being of the people and did not ask for a high position and generous salary. Su Fengnian felt a bit helpless and said, "Thousands of scholars have gone to the cold. Just like how some scholars from other places have privately criticized them, up until now, they have all been minor officials. It is like a rich and powerful gentleman casually giving alms to beggars on the side of the road. It does not conform to the logic of 1,000 gold coins supporting a scholar. Although Song Dongming has become the deputy administrator of Bailiang and is a secondary second-rank official, he is not strictly a scholar who has gone to the cold. As the rumors say, Song Dongming is more like Su Beiji, Huang Fuchang, and the others. He is a trusted aide that I, Su Fengnian, made an exception and promoted based on my personal preference." At this point, Su Fengnian gave a self-deprecating laugh. Now that Bailiang has won the war, logically speaking, it should be time for officials to make wishes and give these scholars who are crying piteously for food something to look forward to. Bailiang only has 4 provinces, and there are only so many official titles. There are already many scholars from other places in the various yamens. I can't chase away the local officials of Bailiang to make room for them. It is not suitable, so I can only use the position of Lingzhou provincial governor as a gimmick. Originally, with Sir Song's ability in governing, of course, you would be the best choice for the position of Lingzhou provincial governor. Song Yin finally spoke. He did not hide anything. On the contrary, he was very direct. He asked, "Prince, if I cannot become the provincial governor in Lingzhou, can I go to another province?" Su Fengyin also said honestly, after Tian Peifong is promoted to deputy administrator, Su Beiji will take over. This is set in stone. The current provincial governor of Liuzhou is Yang Guangdou, and if nothing goes wrong, the next one will be Qin Shiliang. It can only be Qin Shiliang. After experiencing a series of wars in Liuzhou, to put it bluntly, even if I am willing to let Sir Song move to Liuzhou, it will be hard for you to convince the masses. This has nothing to do with your ability in governing. As for Yuzhou, I can tell you the truth. Hu Kuei, who wants to make a name for himself on the battlefield, will return to the border army very soon. However, the next provincial governor has to be chosen carefully. Compared to Liangzhou, Yuzhou places more importance on Wu Qingwen. Otherwise, Tian Peifong would not have been so sullen a few years ago, complaining that he was just a pretty-faced provincial governor. Back then, he tried his best to get a position in Lingzhou. This was something that everyone in Bailiang knew about. During the Great Battle of Liangmeng, Yuzhou contributed a lot and suffered the most casualties. It is not appropriate for you to go to Yuzhou. Chapter 1595. Song Yin grimaced and said, "If you say so, then I will give up. It's good that we've talked about it, so I don't have to keep thinking about it." Song Yin knew that he could not go to Liangzhou, Liuzhou, or Yuzhou. Not only would he not be promoted in Lingzhou this time, after setting the precedent of buying a horse with 1,000 taels of gold, there might not be a position suitable for Song Yin in the future, because Lingzhou would become the best place for scholars to go to Liangzhou. The Jiang and beyond the Great Wall that did not hear war drums and smoke was naturally suited for scholars. Bailiang might be able to form a stable situation of North Minister and South Minister. Thus, Song Yin was particularly worried. He was not a pedantic scholar. Although he was not the kind of official who was overly obsessed with fame and fortune, he was not blindly loyal to anyone. After all, one's ambition was directly linked to the size of the official's hat on one's head. Think about it. If Zhang Jiulu was a low-ranking official in a yamen, how could he have single-handedly created the power of Liang today? Su Fengyin gently exhaled. He did not turn his head to look at Song Yin. 3 years. If you can last 3 years, I can only do what I promised you in the beginning. If you feel wronged, I can let you leave Bailiang's officialdom and head to Great Peace City while Yangshan's apricot has cooled down. Su Fengyin said calmly, "This is not me testing you. Ever since Su Xiao, Bailiang has not had the habit of playing with the schemes of the court. On this land, there are not many scholars. How can they withstand the torment? If one can come out, it is one. Even if there are flowers blooming in the wall, there is fragrance outside the wall. I will not stop them, much less cut them down with a cold knife." Song Yan's body leaned back slightly, his shoulders rising and falling with the horse. He said lazily, "If I, Song Yan, go to Great Peace City, can the son of the Zhao family keep pace with me? No way, right? Will he come personally to explain because I can't be promoted? No way, right? Song Yan's knees are not that hard, but at least in Bailiang, I don't have to go to court every day to kneel. Day after day, year after year, there is no end to it. A scholar standing as an official is more comfortable than kneeling as an official. Besides, my current position is not small. Of course, if one day the son of the Zhao family sends someone to find me and say, 'Song Yin, the 6 ministries of the imperial court lack a minister. Why don't you make do with it for now? Later on, I'll let you go to the Secretariat and Minxia provinces to be the chief official. I guarantee that when you enter the coffin, you'll have the posthumous title of Wen Zhen or something. I guarantee that when the time comes, even if the prince stops me, I'll cry, make a fuss, and threaten to hang myself." Su Fengyin laughed heartily. "Lord Song, oh Lord Song, don't even think about it. Miss Song's appearance is not bad, but it's not to the point of bringing disaster to the country and its people. Not to mention her knowledge and ability, Secretary Yin is better than you when it comes to giving birth to a daughter. Song Yin very rudely snorted coldly. When they arrived at the provincial governor's residence, Su Beiji was still as haughty as ever. After learning that the prince of northern Liang had come in person, he didn't even bother to show his face, let alone mustering a large force to open the gate. Su Fengyin could only head to the study with Song Yin. The frightened steward carefully pushed open the door to the study, only to see the provincial governor, who had yet to take off his official robes, sitting on a chair and handling government affairs. The study was in a mess and books were scattered all over the floor. Su Fengyin bent down to pick up the books. Song Yin smiled as he walked to the window and opened it for some fresh air. When Su Fengyin was almost done tidying up the study, only then did Su Beiji put down his brush. Rubbing his wrist, he raised his head to glance at Su Fengyin. The latter smiled and said, "Right now, Song Dongming and Bai Yuxian are fighting on Mount Qingliang. Although they are both cultured scholars with status, so they won't cause too much trouble, I still don't feel at ease. Isn't that why I want you to go to Liangzhou to be a peacemaker, using your identity as provincial governor of Liangzhou to help me keep an eye on them?" Su Beiji said calmly, "Let's not talk about whether or not those two will have a nod in their hearts. Let's talk about the mess in Lingzhou. You don't let Song Biejia, who is familiar with the area, be the provincial governor just to appease the scholars going to Liangzhou. Do you really think there won't be any mistakes when the time comes?" Su Fengyin smiled and said, "Then what do you think we should do?" Su Beiji went straight to the point and said, "Did Li Gongda say that he wanted to resign as administrator and have Song Dongming take his place?" Su Fengyin nodded and said he did say that. What he meant was that he didn't want to be the administrator and only wanted to keep the empty title of governor of the construction of the new city outside Liangzhou. However, I didn't agree to that. Su Beiji smiled coldly and said, "What? Are you afraid that people will say that you are getting rid of the donkey after it has outlived its usefulness? That will chill the hearts of the old officials of Beiliang? Or are you worried that Li Hanlin's side won't be able to justify it?" Su Fengyin smiled, but didn't say anything. Su Beiji was faintly angry and said in a low voice, "It's just Lingzhou. That's not small at all." Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "It's not small, but it's not big enough either." Su Beiji said, "Then let Sir Song be the provincial governor of Liangzhou. I'll just take up an idle position in Mount Qingliang. I can still help you keep things in check." Su Fengyin still shook his head and threw a glance at Song Yin, who was watching the fire from the other side. Song Yin rejoiced in Su Beiji's misfortune and said, "Your Highness, who in the world would be unwilling to be the provincial governor and only be an official of another person? Isn't this making things difficult for Song Yin? Besides, the provincial governor of Liangzhou is much more precious than our provincial governor of Lingzhou. I can't say such words that go against my heart. Besides, provincial governor Su clearly wants to rise up. If I get involved, I'll lose the provincial governor and go to Liangzhou to sit on the cold bench. My position will become lower and lower. When provincial governor Su comes to his senses one day, then the relationship that I've worked so hard to build up over the past few days will be gone. Whether it's for public or private reasons, I won't help your Highness persuade provincial governor." After Song Yan's interruption, the atmosphere in the study room was no longer as tense as before. Su Beiji had probably vented all the resentment that had been building up for a long time. He quickly regained his composure and said, "Do you not trust Song Dongming or Bai Yu? Or do you not trust both of them?" Su Fengyin moved a chair and sat down. "It's not that I'm suspicious of anyone, but with Juzi at Mount Qingliang, I'll feel more at ease outside Beiliang Pass." Seeing Su Beiji stare at him without blinking, Su Fengyin felt a little guilty. Chen Shiliang won't leave Liangzhou no matter what. It's clear that he wants to take root there. I really can't do anything about it. Su Beiji smiled slightly. "Your Highness really knows how to take advantage of soft persimmons." Su Fengyin resentfully did not reply. Song Yan's expression was strange. The relationship between His Highness and Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang was really worth pondering. Otherwise, why would Provincial Governor Su's tone sound like a woman fighting for the position of head wife? Su Beiji's expression suddenly warmed up. Liangzhou is not easy. In that great battle where victory and defeat were on the line, both sides brought out their trump cards. This was especially true for Beiliang, who was at a disadvantage in terms of military strength. Not only did the 30,000 Long Xiang army enter the battlefield, but the two towns in Liangzhou, other than Xianxia, and the Liangzhou cavalry that had rushed over as reinforcements, even the 4,000 Western Region private soldiers that Lu Wanbao and Chai Dondi of the Sima clan had temporarily gathered, as well as the 20,000 monk soldiers of Mount Lantau that the Six Pearl Bodhisattva had urgently mobilized. Even Chao Wei's 10,000 hidden elite cavalry had no choice but to turn around and reinforce Liangzhou. Only then did they manage to win this bloody battle by a hair's breadth. It could be said that the loss of any troop would have led to the fall of Liangzhou. Not to mention the fact that they were able to send a few thousand cavalry to the central battlefield after the battle to coordinate with the cavalry outside Beiliang's pass. In the end, they successfully forced Dong Zhuo to give up on his plan to destroy the Jade and Common Stone. If it was just Beiliang's army that was wiped out at the mouth of the gourd, Dong Zhuo, who had already pulled out the nail in Huda City, could completely ignore it and continue to advance south. Thus, it could be said that Liangzhou, which originally did not have much to do with the overall situation, was the true decisive factor in the Battle of Liangmeng in the second year of Xiangfu. Su Beiji stood up and stared at Su Fengyan. You should know that even if I stored up grain on a large scale before the battle and used various methods to borrow grain from the surrounding areas of Beiliang, even Western Shu, if we want to win the next battle, let alone the imperial court restricting the transport of grain, as long as the transport of grain from Liang does not fully support Beiliang, then the result is that it is not impossible to fight the war, but many of our people will die in Beiliang. Perhaps 30,000, perhaps 50,000, perhaps even more. Beiliang, what should we do? Su Fengyan sat quietly on the chair. After a long silence, he finally opened his mouth and said, "After I leave this study, I will make a trip to Great Peace City." Song Yan's expression changed dramatically. Su Beiji suddenly slammed his fist on the table and said angrily, "You, Su Fengyan, can afford to lose this face, but my Beiliang cannot. Lu Jinu of Huta City, Wang Lingbao of Liuzhou, Tianheng of Yuzhou, my Beiliang cannot afford to lose the tens of thousands of heroic souls that died in battle." Su Fengyan silently stood up and silently walked out of the study. Song Yan wanted to speak, but stopped. In the end, he only sighed. Su Beiji roared angrily at that figure. The Beiliang cavalry can even stop 1,000,000 soldiers of Beimeng. Is it very difficult to take down the two rivers of Liang? He did not stop walking. In the dark corridor, that figure that was not old was slightly hunched. Chapter 1596. This was an army of 800 cavalry that had left the vassal territories without the permission of the Bureau of Military Personnel. They had traveled from Beiliang to Yuzhou, through Hezhou, and were slowly making their way to the western part of the capital. Along the way, the garrisons of the various provinces that were supposed to stop this army of light cavalry kept quiet out of fear, not even making a token appearance to question them. As a result, the 800 cavalry moved through the northern border of Liang as if they were unstoppable. The elite cavalry of Beimeng on the eastern front had done the same at the northern defense line of Jihe and Hezhou, but the problem was that Wang Sui had tens of thousands of soldiers under his command at the time, while this army of cavalry only numbered 800. According to normal reasoning, with just 800 people, forget about Liaodong, where northern Meng and Liyang were both heavily garrisoned. Even if they were thrown into Guangling Road, where the flames of war were swirling about, they still wouldn't be able to make a single ripple. Along with the 800 riders, who were far from being as fast as the wind and lightning, one by one, intelligence reports from Huai Jidushi Kainan, Military Administrator Han Lin, King of Hanzhou Xiong, Deputy General Yang Huchen of Ji Province, and other important ministers, were delivered to the capital at the speed of 800 li. Finally, on the westernmost border of the capital, an elite force responsible for the safety of the capital appeared. This was the Jifu garrisoned army, with the Western Fortress camp as its main force. The three main camps of the Western Army had mobilized in full force, numbering 7,000 men, half on horseback and half on foot. This Western Army should have been led by Yuan Tingshan, who was conferred the title of Western Pacifying General. However, this Ji province general could not even keep his position, let alone have any control over the Western Army, which was second only to the Jingji Northern Army. The 7,000 soldiers of the Western Army today were led by Anxi General Zhao Gui, a member of the Zhao clan's imperial clan. Above his head was one of the four commandants of the capital with the title of General Fenwu, the Huqi commandant, and Yuqi Changgong as his deputy. 7,000 well-rested soldiers were facing off against 800 travel-worn light cavalry, and the former were acting like they were facing a powerful foe. Yuqi Changgong, who was as famous as Yang Huqin and Song Li, was still able to maintain his composure. But Anxi General Zhao Gui was sweating profusely. He sat timidly on his horse, his stomach full of complaints as he softly cursed those old bastards from the imperial clan court. How could he be lying when he said that he was ill? Even Tang Taizhuang of the Ministry of War had turned a blind eye to it. But in the end, it was his own family that had harmed his own. He had even threatened that if he didn't want to lead the army, he would use the name of the imperial clan court to impeach his majesty for cowering at the last minute. Under the scorching sun, Zhao Gui felt like dying. If it had been 10 years ago, he would have led 7,000 soldiers to intercept a few hundred Bailiang barbarians in his own territory. Forget about the Ministry of War and the imperial clan court using both hard and soft tactics. They wouldn't have been able to stop him from reaping the rewards. However, as the cavalry left Bailiang, a few rumors spread from the northwest to the center of the capital, and then drifted out through the cracks of the yamen's doors or the beaded curtains of the palace. After hearing these shocking news, Zhao Gui, who was far better at killing in bed than on the battlefield, was completely dumbfounded. Had these Bailiang barbarians really defeated a million-strong army of Beimang? It was said that even the famous Beimang general, Yang Yuanzhan, had his head chopped off in that damned place called Goremouth. There were even people who swore that the Jingguan temples in Yuzhou were as numerous as the snowmen in the capital during winter. Zhao Gui's mouth twitched violently. He turned to Yuqi Changgong and asked in a trembling voice, "General Yuqi, if that little barbarian Su—" "Oh no, it's the king of Bailiang. If the king of Bailiang refuses to stop, are we really going to have to fight with him?" Yuqi Changgong, who had been ousted from the position of general of Anxi by this noble of the imperial clan, said expressionlessly, "General Zhao, this is the order from above. We can't disobey it." In the past, whenever Zhao Gui met Captain Yuqi Changgong, he would purposely call him Sir Captain. Now, he squeezed out a smile and said, "Don't the military books say that subduing the enemy without fighting is the best of the best? If that king of Bailiang doesn't see the big picture, I have a good relationship with the Southern Army. Why don't we inform them and call a few thousand men over? It'll also teach the king of Bailiang the illustrious might of our garrisons in the capital." Yuqi Changgong calmly said, "General Zhao, if this general remembers correctly, no matter who it is, anyone who dares to privately transfer the capital's troops out of their garrisons will be beheaded. Let alone you and me. Even Assistant Minister Tang of the Ministry of War doesn't have this right." Zhao Gui laughed dryly. "I'm just worried that the young vassal king, who spends most of his time in the northwest, doesn't know the severity of the situation." Yuqi Changgong narrowed his eyes and gazed into the distance. He had no interest in chatting with this Anxi general, only patiently waiting for the next batch of scouts to bring back military intelligence. Compared to Zhao Gui, who was a so-called great general who had risen from the ranks of the dwarves in the imperial family, Yuqi Changgong had gone to the front lines of the Liaodong border after he had reached the age of 20. He had worked hard to become a military officer at the border, and only then had he returned to the capital after his family had opened up some connections. He had risen step by step to his current position. Yuqi Changgong was naturally not an idiot like Zhao Gui, who had relied on his family name to reach his position. The number of people in the capital who truly knew the details of the battle in Bailiang could be counted on two hands. Even in the Ministry of War, the position of minister was currently vacant. Assistant Minister Su Gong was patrolling the border. Perhaps only Assistant Minister Tang Tai-Zhuang, who controlled the Ministry of War in the capital, knew the inside story. Because Yuchi Changong had once trained in Liaodong, he had a valuable personal relationship with Assistant Minister Tang. As a result, he knew more about the truth of the Northwest than Zhao Gui. Not only did he know that Bailiang had repelled Bei Meng's million-man army on 3 fronts, he even had a rough estimate of the losses on Liang Meng's side. Yuchi Changong had personally experienced the astonishing strength of the Bei Meng cavalry on the border. The more this was the case, the more shocked Yuchi Changong felt. Although he appeared to be more composed than Zhao Gui, Yuchi Changong's right hand had never left the saber at his waist. His knuckles had already turned white. Perhaps Zhao Gui was just afraid of the young man's status as a vassal king and the 300,000 Bailiang cavalry. At most, he might have added on the terrifying title of the new Prince Liang as a martial grandmaster. But Yuchi Changong truly had no confidence that the 7,000 people who had been away from war for many years could withstand the charge of 800 cavalry. One charge could stabilize the formation, but after 2 or 3 times. On the battlefield of official history, regular soldiers faced rebels, top elites faced ordinary regular soldiers. The advantage of military strength on the surface had always been meaningless. Not to mention the distant past, just the spring and autumn war 20 to 30 years ago, when tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of bandits like locusts were killed by a few thousand imperial soldiers until rivers of blood flowed. When had this ever been a small number? And on a large-scale battlefield, it was not rare for one side to use thousands or even hundreds of elites to break through the enemy's formation. In the past, Yuchi Changong did not look down on the Bailiang frontier army that was known as the best cavalry in the world like the scholars of Liang, but he did not take it too seriously. He always felt that the southern Ji infantry of the old General Yang, Xianxia, might not be able to compete with the Yuzhou infantry, but there was not much difference. He also felt that the Liao defense line, like the Duoyan elite cavalry and the Blackwater cavalry, were the top fighting force even in the Bailiang frontier army. But now, Yuchi Changong was not so optimistic. Yuchi Changong unconsciously tightened his grip on the hilt of his saber. His emotions were complicated. If the Bailiang cavalry was not 100,000, but a true 300,000, then would they be able to directly attack the Norland in the heart of Bei Meng and help the Central Plains completely conquer the desert and grassland for the first time? But if the Bailiang really had such a force, since they could take down Bei Meng, then even if it was more difficult to take down the great city behind him, how difficult could it be? When the scout galloped over to report that the 800 cavalry were only 10 li away, Zhao Gui forced a smile and asked, "General Yuchi, I don't think the king of Bailiang will really start a war right under the emperor's feet, right?" Yuchi Changong did not have the mood to hit Zhao Gui when he was down. He frowned and said, "Wait for them to advance another 5 li. If the Bailiang sends scouts to come into contact with our army, then it means that the vassal king will follow the rules." Unknowingly, Zhao Gui's helmet was a bit crooked. He reached out to support it with trembling hands and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He asked in a small voice, "If we don't see the Bailiang vanguard scouts, what do we do?" Yuchi Changong said in a low voice, "Just go into formation and meet the enemy." Zhao Gui trembled and almost fell off his horse. He laughed to hide his embarrassment and comforted himself. It shouldn't be. Last time, the king of Bailiang came to the capital to meet the previous emperor. No matter if it was at the Maui embassy or in the court, he still followed the rules. It was clear that the Anshi general had automatically ignored the actions of the crown prince outside the imperial college and the disturbance at the Juzhou embassy. He had even tossed to the back of his mind his bold words and lofty aspirations that he had once declared that if he ran into that little barbarian, he would exchange blows with him. The two armies had faced each other for less than 5 li, but there was still not a single Bailiang cavalry to appear. Zhao Gui slapped himself in the face and said angrily, "You jinx!" Yuchi Changong did not need to look at the cavalry behind him to feel that suffocating pressure. Thinking back to that year, When the Hu cavalry captain Yuchi Changong went into battle as a sergeant in Liaodong for the first time, it was as if he could clearly hear his own heavy breathing. Chapter 1597. Because they were overly nervous before the new soldiers charged, the entire world would become silent, so much so that people couldn't even hear the drums. Less than 3 li away, no Bailiang cavalry had left their ranks. Zhao Giru was dejected and no longer had the energy to talk to Yuchi Changong. His eyes were dull as he muttered to himself on horseback, "King of Bailiang, can't we talk nicely?" In the end, Bailiang and Liang are still one family. It's not good to fight with your own family. You Bailiang have killed hundreds of thousands of Baimang barbarians. Haven't you killed enough yet? What kind of hero are you if you kill your own people? Besides, you're an expert on the same level as Dong Tai. Fighting and killing with people like me is degrading. Yuchi Changong raised a hand high. Without turning around, he roared with all his might, "Set up the formation." The 4,000 infantry were in the center, forming layers upon layers of defense. The shields were like walls, and the archers were ready to draw their bows. The 3,000 cavalry on the left and right wings began to raise their spears. According to the intelligence reports from Lianghuai and Zhaogo, the 800 Bailiang light cavalry didn't carry any spears, only crossbows and sabers. Yuchi Changong, who had already urged his horse to the front of the left wing's west base camp, sadly discovered that he seemed to have become that fledgling of the Liaodong border army again. West Base Camp was the first camp of the Jingji Western Army. It had always been arrogant and believed that it alone could defeat the other 2 camps. The camp's name came from the West Wall. However, after 20 years, everyone, including Yuchi Changong himself, had forgotten who had taken down the West Wall. It seemed that only now, when they stood opposite Bailiang and had to face the Su family's cavalry head-on, did they realize this forgotten truth. The pale-faced Anshi General Zhao Giru led a group of his own cavalry and retainers to the right wing of the cavalry, constantly glancing in Yuchi Changong's direction. This was the first time in his life that he regretted becoming enemies with Yuchi Changong. Every time there was a war, there had to be a high-ranking officer leading the charge. Originally, this was the military law of Liang. However, other than the 2 Liao provinces and, at most, Nanjiang, the military forces of the vast majority of other places were more or less not so rigid. Right now, the main General Zhao Gui was continuously retreating backwards, causing the entire right-wing cavalry to become slightly restless, their formation starting to become lax. Although the ordinary soldiers in the Jingji Western Army did not know the shocking news that Bailiang had defeated Baimang, who had not heard that the new Prince Liang was a martial arts grandmaster who had defeated Wang Xianxia of the Wulin city. This was an immortal who could fly around. Even if they felt that the young prince would not be able to kill all 7,000 soldiers, it should be possible for him to kill 700 or 800 people, right? As one of the 2 wings of the cavalry, wouldn't they be the first to die if they charged at the front? If that was the case, 1 out of 3 or 4 cavalry would die. If they were unlucky, wouldn't they be slaughtered like chickens? Even if they were lucky enough to survive, the young vassal king, led by 300,000 Bailiang cavalry, had died in this place, causing the Bailiang army to attack Great Peace City. Who would be responsible for this? It would be them, the little pawns. Would the powerful leaders of the 6 ministries be loyal to you? Under the sun on the ground, in everyone's sight, the light cavalry dressed in white armor shone brightly. The 800 cavalry slowly advanced and did not start a charge. Just as everyone thought that the Bailiang cavalry would stop in front of the formation and then send someone to negotiate with the Anshi general and Lieutenant Hu Qi. Strange things happened. The 800 cavalry formed a charging formation in the blink of an eye. There were no spears, but the 800 white-armored cavalry all gripped the Bailiang sabers at their waists. It was clear that this Bailiang cavalry, who were at an absolute disadvantage in numbers, could still pull out their sabers at any moment and start a charge at any moment against the 7,000 soldiers of the imperial court waiting for them to tire out. The Anshi general Zhao Gui started to gallop his horse, but he did not charge in to kill the enemy. Instead, he displayed astounding riding skills and circled to the back of the right-wing cavalry. Lieutenant Hu Qichonggong knew that as long as the Bailiang cavalry started to charge, whether they won or lost, it would be a small matter. Once the imperial court and Bailiang had a falling out, Yu Qichonggong and the entire Yuqi family would not be able to bear the blame. But at the same time, he could not retreat, not even a step. If he were to retire today, then his official career in this lifetime would be completely over. Not only would he, Yu Qichonggong, suffer a calamity, but his entire family could forget about having a comfortable day in Li Yang's officialdom. So Yu Qichonggong suddenly squeezed his horse's belly and rode out alone. He came to less than 100 paces from the front line of the Bailiang cavalry. He bowed, cupped his fists, and said loudly, "This general, Yu Qichonggong, greets the king of Bailiang." Each of the Bailiang cavalry lines had no more than 200 men, and in the center was a single, eye-catching, ordinary carriage. There were only 4 or 5 escorting horses nearby. The curtains of the carriage were still and lowered. Receiving no response, the lieutenant continued to lower his head and said loudly, "Reporting to the king of Bailiang. The vassal kings have entered the capital. According to the laws of Liang, the retainers of the Bailiang and Huainan kings need to stop at the capital's western army camp." Yu Qichonggong cupped his fists. Each day felt like a year. This officer with real power gritted his teeth and slowly raised his head. When he saw a Bailiang cavalry officer who looked like a lieutenant, he did not show any signs of wanting to speak, but his hand had changed from gripping his saber to pulling it out. Yu Qichonggong swallowed and braced himself to say hoarsely, "This general earnestly requests the king of Bailiang to act according to the laws." At this moment, an uproar came from the Western army. Yu Qichonggong, who had already lost all hope, turned his head in shock and saw 3 riders galloping over. One of them was an old eunuch from the palace, wearing an eye-catching red embroidered robe. He held up a yellow handkerchief and shouted in a shrill voice, "The imperial edict has arrived." In addition, there was a rather young official among the 2 riders. Looking at his official patch, he should be an outstanding figure from the Ministry of War. Yu Qichonggong immediately felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. It was as if he had just taken a trip to the gates of hell, and he almost collapsed on the back of his horse. The lieutenant of the Hu cavalry, who was listening to the announcement beside the eunuch, did not hear what the imperial edict said in detail. He only understood the general meaning. It said that the emperor had specially authorized 800 vassal kings to enter the capital with the king of Bailiang and set up camp near the Xiamawi post station. When the old eunuch in the embroidered robe shouted the words, "Accept the edict," everyone was silent, especially that young official from the Ministry of War. The corners of his mouth curled up in a playful smile. The official from the Ministry of Rights, who had been unlucky and had been captured to be an evil person, was much more shrewd. He kept his head down. If the imperial edict had not just ended, he would have pretended to doze off on the back of his horse. The curtain of the carriage did not move at all. The old eunuch who held the position of eunuch in the Bureau of Rights had a face as stiff as the bark of a tree. It did not move at all. Even Yu Qichonggong could feel the dark presence of the old eunuch. As the second in command of the Bureau of Rights, one of the most important people among the eunuchs of Great Peace City, he was able to wear the red embroidered robe. At this moment, even in the face of such a rebellious official, the old man still suppressed his anger and did not show any other expression. He did not speak as he held the imperial edict. A voice rang out, "Are you done?" The old eunuch stilled and then finally lowered his head. He slowly said, "Finished." The voice in the carriage did not change in tone. "Then make way for this king." Yu Qichonggong was tongue-tied. The young official from the Ministry of War was about to reprimand when the old eunuch turned his head and glared darkly at the latter. Then this eunuch from the Bureau of Rights, that even the ministers had to treat with respect, said softly to Yu Qichonggong, "Captain Yuqi, why are you not protecting the king of Bailiang?" When Yu Qichonggong turned his horse around to command the army to spread out, Gao Tingshu, who was currently in the limelight in the capital and had risen to fame in the Ministry of War, clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. The old eunuch lowered his head and said in a soft voice, "King of Baelyong, this old servant has to return to the capital and cannot accompany your highness." There was no response from the carriage. The old eunuch led the two officials from the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Rights back. The imperial edict was still there. Since Li Yang unified the world, from the first year of Yonghui to the second year of Xiangfu, only 2 imperial edicts had been rejected. And the person who had rejected the imperial edict was the same person. It was that king of Baelyong who didn't even bother to lift the curtain of the carriage. The official from the Ministry of Rights carefully glanced at the eunuch from the Bureau of Rights. There was no change in the old man's expression. Gao Tingshu turned his head to look at the 800 cavalry passing through the center of the infantry formation of the Western Army. He sneered, "Such arrogance." The official from the Ministry of Rights clearly did not see how the eunuch opened his mouth, but he could hear a soft laugh coming from his throat. This made his hair stand on end. Gao Tingshu's lips curled up again. Previously, he had intentionally or unintentionally slowed down, and the eunuch had not raised any objections. Gao Tingshu knew that a good show was about to begin, because this was Great Peace City, not Baelyong. When the walls of Great Peace City slowly entered the sight of the Baelyong cavalry, they appeared even taller and more majestic. Su Fingyin finally lifted a corner of the curtain and looked over. He wore the embroidered robe that had been sewn by the Baelyong Bureau of Gold Thread Weaving. He smiled at the carriage driver and said, "The last time I came here, I felt that the walls were very tall. Looking at it now, it does not seem as tall as the Jing temples at the mouth of our gourd." Su Yanbing, who was acting as the carriage driver, jerked his lips but did not speak. In the second year of Xiangfu, late autumn, the king of Baelyong entered the capital. Chapter 1598. It was said that there was no wall in the world that didn't have a crack. Although the city walls of Graydon were high, the wind was also strong, and there were countless whispers. Therefore, gossip could always spread to every corner at an astonishing speed. Not long after the new Prince Liang stayed at the Mawei post house, the conflict between Baelyong's cavalry and the Jingji Western Army spread like wildfire. As a result, the minister of the Ministry of Rights, personally welcoming the prince into the city, gave people an unusual feeling. Most people, while praising the emperor's magnanimity, spared no effort in cursing the young prince's rudeness and unreasonableness. They thought that the court should have left this northwest barbarian outside the city until he suddenly came to his senses and learned to submit a memorial to the emperor to ask for forgiveness. Only then would he be allowed to enter the city. Compared to the common people who didn't know the depth of the water, the civil and military officials of Graydon City, especially those who were qualified to participate in the morning court and had entered the Liang officialdom, should have been the most confident group of people who could order Baelyong around. This time, for the first time, they were all silent. It was rare to see a grand occasion where one dog barked and hundreds of dogs barked. For example, the censorate censor and the 6 branches censors, who were not high officials but had noble statuses, after privately communicating with each other, they all gave up the idea of impeaching the young prince. The reason was simple. As the carriage entered Graydon City, in addition to the confrontation between Baelyong's light cavalry and the 2 generals, Zhao Guiwei and Qi Changgong, the shocking news of Baelyong defeating Beimeng was also brought to the capital. At this sensitive time, it was useless to impeach the number 1 warrior of the new dynasty, no matter how many reasons you came up with. On the other hand, how many enemies had the Liang border army, which was built with half the country's taxes, killed in 20 years? Was it 100,000? According to the military law of Liang, seizing 80 heads of northern Mang was enough for a low-level soldier to be promoted to a military officer of the border army. It was said that this time, not only did northern Liang kill countless enemies, they even took the head of northern Mang's great general Yang Yuanzhan. If they were to be rewarded based on merit, how great of a military merit would this be? Since Su Xiaoman was already a prince, then the title of marquis that the scholars of Liang dreamed of was meaningless. Could it be that the previous emperor had just taken away the old Prince Liang's title, and in the blink of an eye, he was going to take it back from the hands of the current emperor. At the same time, the low-ranking officials of the capital naturally began to silently criticize the Beimang barbarians. Previously, the army on the Eastern Front had aggressively advanced all the way to Gord, Xiaoguang City. Beiliang's 300,000 border army could drive Beimang's million-strong army back to their homeland, and the Liang border army was not small either. Don't talk about loud thunder, but small raindrops. Your Liang border army hadn't even had a decent thunder in 20 years. Su Fengyan only took Su Yanbing to the Mawei post house. The 800 white horse guards were all arranged by the Ministry of War's Ministry of Rights to appropriate accommodations near the post house. After Su Fengyan got off the carriage, he found that the many officials of the post house were different from the last time he came to the capital. They were all younger and unfamiliar faces. When they saw the king of Beiliang in his black and gold embroidered robe, their eyes were filled with deep fear. Su Fengyan raised his head to look at the dragon claw locust tree outside the post house. It was still there, but the people had changed. The Mawei post house had always been a post house that belonged exclusively to the Beiliang Road. It was also one of the few post houses that could be built in the capital. Because the old prince of Liang, Su Xiao, rarely came to the capital to meet the emperor after he was made king, it had always been a gloomy scene. The officials of the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Revenue had suggested countless times that the post house should be dismantled. As a result, when the officials of the two ministries joined the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Revenue a few years ago, repeating the same old tune became a custom. It was like a pledge of allegiance. If anyone dared to not submit a memorial to the emperor regarding this matter, it was inevitable that they would be ostracized and pinched by their senior colleagues. However, the late emperor and the current son of heaven both had a subtle attitude toward this matter, so much so that there were old foxes in the officialdom who joked that if one day the Damaiyai hostel was really demolished, it would be very boring. Su Fengyan was very familiar with the post house. He asked for a room in the back courtyard from the post house officer Hong. After the trembling post house officer slowly left with his body bowed, Su Fengyan moved two wrought-tan chairs under the eaves. He and Su Yanbing each sat down. In the eyes of Mount Qing Liang, this was Su Fengyan's last-minute decision to rush into the capital. It was not that there were no objections. However, Su Fengyan's control over the Beiliang cavalry and the entire Beiliang road officialdom could be said to have reached its peak. Other than Su Beiji, who had flown into a rage when they met in Lingzhou, only Song Dongming had sent a spy from the Fushui Fong to deliver a secret letter. The wording of the letter was implicit. It was probably not in favor of Su Fengyan taking the risk. It probably also expressed the thoughts of a group of old generals like Yan Wenluan. Only Bai Yu, who had arrived late from Wutanyan, sent a letter. His words were supportive. Su Yanbing said softly, Second Commandery Princess said to let Huyan Daguan follow into the capital. Prince should have agreed to it. A centipede dies, but does not fall down. Moreover, the Zhao clan in Liang is far from the point of decline. Even without Han Xianxia, Lu Haoshi, and Qi Jiajia, there are not many Qi cultivators left after 2 twists and turns. However, it is still the most virtuous city in the world. It should not be underestimated. Su Fengyan smiled and said, I did not ask Huyan Daguan to come out of the mountain. The Zhao clan's emperor also did not ask Gu Jiantang to rush into the capital. Let's call it even. Su Yanbing sighed and said, if the imperial edict had come a little later, Beiliang would have parted ways with the Zhao clan. Su Fengyan shook his head and said, there won't be a fight. Zhao Zhuan's original intention was to let the Jingji Western Army test my bottom line. If we were easy to negotiate with, then he would have the confidence to demand an exorbitant price. If I did not guess wrongly, the eunuch from the ceremony directorate who was in charge of writing the imperial edict must have been instructed by the emperor to show up at the right time. Therefore, no matter what, they would not start a fight in the capital region. If they really fought, a total of 7,000 elites would be scared witless by 800 cavalry, where the emperor and the imperial court put their faces. Moreover, even if the Western army was lucky enough to win, it would still be a terrible mess to clean up. Hearing Su Fengyin deliberately emphasize the word elites, Su Yanbing smiled knowingly. Beiliang's local garrison, not to mention Liangzhou and Yuzhou, perhaps even Lingzhou, is tougher than them. Su Fengyin did not mock him at all. Actually, the foundation of the Liang army is still there. Unfortunately, after 20 years of peace, the annual military exercises cannot compare to the real fighting of the border army. Therefore, they have lost their edge. After all, there is a world of difference between a sharpened blade and a sharpened blade. However, if they are given a few years to hone themselves in the flames of war, they may not be too bad. For example, if Beiliang wanted to establish a country, it would only be a small Beimeng at most and would not be able to outlast Liang, whose national strength was growing day by day. However, if Beiliang staked everything on one throw and under the precondition that Beimeng did not take advantage of the situation to intervene in the Central Plains, they could charge thousands of li to attack Grain City. I believe they could take down the Huai River. At this point, Su Fengyin smiled. 1 month, at most 1 month, the Beiliang cavalry would be able to wipe out the entire northern front of Liang, including Jizhou. Also, their losses would not exceed 20,000. They would directly reach Great and City. Su Fengyin put his hands under his head and gazed at the sky above Jingdou. However, it would be too difficult to break into Jingdou. In the area around Jingdou, other than the south, which is good for cavalry, the other places are not. When the time comes, not to mention Gu Jiantong's 2 Liao border armies, the king of Jiaodong Zhao Sui and the king of Jing and Zhao Sun, perhaps even the Nanjiang army would take advantage of the situation to head north. However, the former all want to contribute to the rescue of the king, while the latter have more thoughts and want to benefit from the battle. Don't forget that there is also the ambitious Chen Jibao. As for Lu Xingxiang and Tang Taizhuang, they are not mediocre people. One battle of Guangling could allow Ko Jianghuai of the western frontier to quickly rise to the ranks of famous generals. After a long battle, it would be easy for Liang to have a few kings of the western frontier or Ma Jianghuai. If Beiliang and West Shu are allies, their chances of winning are higher. On the other hand, can a desperate Liang go and borrow troops from Beimeng?